live. Okay. Greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andrii Zvorygin, and today I'm joined by General Stan Osserman and Dan Gowin. They will be doing a presentation, and we also have our peak oil panel. We'll start with intros from Stan. Go ahead, Stan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stan Osserman. I grew up here in Hawaii. Was a police officer here for a while. Was in the military for a while. Graduated from the University of Hawaii. I have a master's from University of Oklahoma in international relations and 3,000 flying hours. I still do some surfing, still do some fishing, and those kind of things. But my background in energy started about 20 years ago as part of the military, where I was asked by the governor of the state of Hawaii to kind of go between initiatives. It's a little bit about me.
Okay, thank you.
Pass
All
it
right.
off to Dan.
Dan, go ahead.
My name is Dan Gowin. My history goes back into my family, really. Most of my family is nuclear Navy. My great uncle Taylor was an ensign on the Nautilus when it went to the North Pole. Most of my family is nuclear Navy. My daughter just got out. She was a nuclear officer. She was in for 12 years. Myself, I tried to avoid the nuclear Navy. I wasn't very successful. Ended up in air defense, and a lot of things that I did when I was a teenager. Dad was at the INL, Idaho National Engineering Lab, and I worked on the ARPANET project. Ended up getting drug into GPS, worked in the government's, the Navy's labs most of the 90s. Got out back into the utility sector. Was at IPL, I'm the guy who designed the computer system that controls the power grids for 26 states and parts of Canada. Was at GE for a couple of years, working alternative fuels program, mainly working on gas turbines. Was at Lilly for about 8 years. Then I was asked to step away from Lilly and get back into the energy sphere. So I'm working with about 3 different companies, and I'm on the board of about 3 different companies working on the subjects that we're going to talk about today.
Sorry, did you want to start the presentation now?
Please.
Then?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's just a pitch for the company. If I can get you to go to the next screen. This simply says this is for informational purposes only, educational purposes only. Understand we're going to be presenting material that's actually from other companies, and of course I'll depict what companies this information comes from. Next page, please. So we're going to review what's going on in energy in the United States. Understand I'm going to talk about this from an engineering perspective, not a theoretical perspective, but from an engineering perspective. Next page, please. Got here, I'm talking about coal, because most people don't realize that coal is not all coal is created equal. Anthracite, that's a type of coal that the power plants haven't seen more than 50 years. So it was a good coal we got out of Pennsylvania. You go down to bitumen. When burning a fuel that's over 40% carbon, you must use a scrubber. Your first problem will be your employees. Most employees will live within 60 miles of your power plant. Every morning when you start to work, your employees will scrape a 1/4 inch ash off their truck. Eventually, they'll have a very human reaction. My God, what am I breathing? Your second problem will be your farmers. Farmers spend millions of dollars on fertilizer and pesticides. Soil testing is a good part of their operation. If you're raining down mercury and cadmium in farmland, eventually you'll be in court. The downside of renting a scrubber, half the power of your turbine will be consumed by the scrubber. Lignite. The U.S. has over 300 years worth of lignite. When your power plant burns lignite, you have to remember half the energy of your fuel is consumed by the scrubber, and then you mix in the grid losses of 4%. You have a total of only 16% of the energy of the fuel that's mined actually arrives on the power grid. Not to mention over 60% of this fuel is not carbon. Where do you store all the ash? What puts a coal-fired power plant out of business? Actually, it's diesel. The front loader, dump truck, and locomotive all run on diesel, loading the coal, dispensing of the ash.
So Dan, I was going to add in here too that there is a lot of back processing for that coal, and you can keep the presentation up, Andrew. But the cost, when you move to lignite, is multiplied. Not quite exponentially, but it's a lot more than just getting it out of the ground, because all your support transportation and things like that is a multiplier for the actual carbon that you're getting out that you're using in your systems. And also these sites turn into hazmat sites, like Dan was saying, besides the pollution that's spread around, the site itself becomes a hazmat site. So there's a lot of cost involved in cleanup and transportation and subsystems that will drive the price. And of course, we don't even think about it, but diesel's one of them.
Next page. Why convert to combined cycle? You can see that's a page from oilprice.com. The U.S. is running out of coal. Per the USGS, bitumen in the U.S. will be, for all practical purposes, be gone by 2032. I've converted 4 coal-fired power plants to combined cycle in my career because of the coal. Note, when replacing an energy source on the power grid, you must first repay the original loan and then depreciate the value of the plant. Only then will you qualify for a new loan to replace the power source. So as much as I know a lot of people don't like us burning coal for inside power plants, and I'll agree, burning coal is not a great choice for generating electricity. Understand a lot of these plants were built long before even I was even born. But as far as replace, I can't just shut down the plant. You have to pay off the original loan, depreciate the value of the plant before you can get before the bankers will give you another loan to replace it with something new. But if you want to know why we're converting these coal-fired power plants over to combined cycle, it's because of the quality of the coal. It's not because of environmental reasons or any of the reasons that they tell the public. It's actually because of the quality of the coal. Because when you're burning lignite will put your power plant out of business. Next page, please. The Braess paradox. You got here, it talks about, it says blackouts becoming the norm. Can the U.S. power grid be saved? Well, I'm going to talk about something that most of you don't know about. It's called the Braess paradox. Braess paradox is the observation that adding one or more roads to a road network can slow down overall traffic flow through it. The paradox was first discovered by Arthur Perot in 1920 and later named by the German mathematician Dietrich Braess in 1968. The paradox has analogs in the electrical power grids and biological systems. It has been suggested in theory that improvement of a multifunctioning network can be accomplished by removing certain parts of it. Adding new generation can cause the power grid to become unstable. Adding load, like housing subdivisions or even Tesla superchargers, can cause the power grid to become unstable. So this is a subject that's not being talked about in the public, that the reason why the power grid in the United States is unstable is not because of it's too old or we need to upgrade a 1,000,000-volt lines or whatever. It's really because of the Braess paradox. And understand, remember, I'm the guy that designed the computer system that controls the power grid for 26 states. So I have a lot of inside knowledge on exactly how to do this.
Could you clarify again, what was your statement of what the Braess paradox is?
The Braess paradox. I mean, I'm stating what's actually in the dictionary, what it says. It's an observation that adding one or more roads. It started out with roads. Adding one or more roads to a road network can slow down overall traffic through it. The paradox was first discovered by Arthur Perot. So, but it has parallels in power grids and biological systems. When biological systems become too complex, it basically goes back to Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. The more complex the system is, the more chance it has of going wrong. Yeah. This Braess paradox is just another way of saying that our power grid is actually too complex.
It's kind of like the law of unintended consequences, or
Well, remember Elon tried to install all these supercharging networks across the United States, and guess what? That failed. He wasn't able to get it done. And the reason why he wasn't able to get it done is because the different public utilities that run the power grids were not willing to install supercharger installations in the power grid because of instability. That's why.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Did you want the next slide?
I think. Yeah. Please. Yeah. Okay. Understand a lot of this is in my backyard. So the Whiting Refinery, it's in Whiting, Indiana. A lot of people get this incorrect. It's built in 1889 by Standard Oil of Indiana. Most people know about Standard Oil and Old Man Rockefeller, but they mispronounced the name of the company incorrectly. It's actually Standard Oil of Indiana. So understand, I live in Old Man Rockefeller's backyard. I live here in Indianapolis. It refines 400,000 barrels per day of crude oil. In 2012, BP undertook a $14 billion modernization project to convert it from American crude oil to heavy Western Canadian crude. I've installed 4 LM6000 gas turbines at the refinery. There are 155 oil refineries in the U.S. for a total finance cost of $2.3 trillion. By the end of 2025, there will be 153 refineries. And the reason why is basically the Phillips 66 refinery in LA will be shut down, and there's a refinery down in Refiners Row down in Houston that's going to be shut down. And what most people don't understand about the refineries, besides they're sitting on this much debt, they understand that how this stuff is financed, it's all financed with massive amounts of debt. Understand refineries only have about a 2 to 3% margin. So when you have high price of oil, and that ends up being reflected in a high price of gasoline and diesel. And then what happens is you get demand destruction. Customers don't want to buy the fuel. The economy slows down. We get more fuel in storage. And the piece that gets sandwiched in between it are the refineries. Understand a refinery, you have to do maintenance on it all the time, because otherwise it's a fire trap. It's a liability for the oil and gas companies.
Okay, so they're shutting down refineries because they can't afford to keep them open.
Yeah, because the margin of 2-3%, and when you have high price of a fuel and you got a customer not willing to buy the fuel, the refinery gets sandwiched. Remember, like I said, it's a liability. If you don't do maintenance all the time, it turns into a fire trap and somebody can get killed.
Okay.
And also, when you try and get it financed, if the policies that are out there in the government are saying we don't want more of this, the banks don't want to lend you money to make more of that. So it's kind of a two-edged sword there.
And it's state and local, by the way. The state or federal can stop doing a refinery, even maintaining a refinery. They can decline a license. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I include this slide because most people don't know what goes on inside a refinery. They never really talk about it. So on the left-hand side, you've got crude oil coming in. On the right-hand side, if you notice, there's like 6 different streams that they blend together to make gasoline, and then everything is in between. Diesel is directly distilled out of crude oil. Currently, over 70% of the world's hydrogen is produced at oil refineries. The primary purpose is to remove sulfur from the product. So down at the bottom, you'll see they pump in natural gas and steam, and they turn that into carbon dioxide and hydrogen. They use water shift to remove the CO2. But they use hydrogen in about every process in the refinery, from the cracker units to you name it. They use it inside the refinery. The reason why I show this is because most people, they know the oil and gas business has a lot to do with hydrogen. They just don't know what's actually going on. And that's why I talk about this.
Hey, Dan, could you mention one more thing too? A lot of people, probably not in this audience, but a lot of people don't realize that you can't just make diesel out of any kind of oil. It's usually the heavier oil. And that also applies into, what does America have mostly? We have like sweet crude.
Right.
And so we start to have to import oil to go to diesel. And that's going to be important later on in the presentation when Dan gets to some other topics.
That has to do with the size of the molecules. The shale oil is a really light molecule, so it's really short. It's too short to make diesel. Diesel is really longer chains of hydrocarbons, so you have to use heavier oils to do it. So what they do in almost every refinery, they'll take heavy oil and light oil, and they blend them together to make this medium mix that it more efficiently passes through the refinery. And it's not just our refineries that do it. All the refineries in the world blend crude together to get the proper mix to optimize the processes in the refinery. Next, please, I think. Okay. Yeah, I talk about this because a lot of people are kind of confused about how they store hydrogen at the refinery. There are 3 storage wells at the Whiting refinery, one for propylene, another for ethylene, the last one is for hydrogen. The volumetrics of hydrogen make it difficult to transport or store. 1 kilogram of hydrogen at room pressure occupies 12,000 liters of volume. I'll say that again. 1 kilogram of hydrogen at room pressure, 1 bar pressure, occupies 12,000 liters of volume. The safest way to store hydrogen is in a gas well. It also is the most economical way to store the gas. Hydrogen is a gas that's lighter than air and will expand to the point to where it won't burn. Hydrogen has to be compressed to be used. So most people don't understand about the hydrogen molecule. They're positively charged, they repel each other, and they'll expand to the point it won't burn. So one of the reasons why it's easier to get the Department of Transportation to actually certify a hydrogen system rather than like diesel and gasoline is because it's actually safer fuel, because once it escapes, it'll actually expand to the point it won't burn. The other reason why I point this out, at the Whiting refinery, they don't use underground salt caverns to store the hydrogen. They simply just drill a well down 46,000 feet, hydraulically fracture the rock. They've been doing it since the 50s.
So are they keeping it at like room pressure, or are they?
Oh, they're using a compressor. They're using a compressor. Okay. You know,
okay.
We'll talk about the compression later on, but yeah, they use mechanical compressors to store it in the well under pressure.
Okay.
Yep. Next page. And the reason why I show this is because most people don't realize the scale of the system here in North America. Up almost 25% of the natural gas in the pipeline system is consumed just powering the pumps, whether you use the gas or not. There are multiple oil and gas pipelines that crisscross North America, trillions of dollars in investment. Note in the Permian, they say they don't have enough natural gas pipeline capacity to bring all of the shale oil to market. I'm looking at the map there. I think they have plenty of infrastructure down there in that corner of Texas between New Mexico and Texas down there. There seems to be a cluster down there. But the reason why I talk about this is because most people don't realize the infrastructure, how vast the oil and gas industry is here in the United States. The other thing is I usually get attacked by the guys that work on the pump stations. When I talk about 25% of the gas that's consumed powering the pumps, they'll say, Dan, my pump's more efficient. I use less than 1% of the gas. And I have to remind them, I said, yeah, but when you add up the inefficiencies across all those pumps, it tends to add up. And
hey, Dan, could you also mention a little bit about as we look at charts and things that talk about barrels of oil per day, does any of that include natural gas? Because you tell me the last thing comes out of a well is natural gas. So
right. Well, yeah, that goes into like overall world production. The truth is, world oil production, actually crude oil, actually peaked in 2018. And right now, you see the Energy Information Agency, the Department of Energy, or the International, they'll claim it's like 103 million barrels a day. The truth is that that 82 to 103, they're making that up with natural gas and natural gas liquids. So it's not actually oil, but they counted it. And what they do is they change the measurement from crude oil to hydrocarbons. Is what they did. So yeah, there's so there's probably a lot more natural gas when you look at it BTU count in the United States there is actual oil. But anyway, I think we got the next one here. Now I include this because most people have never seen hardware like this. So that's most Americans don't recognize the scale of the oil and gas industry. A natural gas pump station, behind the cylinders painted in blue are pistons over 12 inches in diameter. This compressor has 6 cylinders with a crankshaft between them. There is a natural gas fired diesel engine on the right powering the pumps. The pumps in the Midwest are housed in buildings to protect them from the creation of methane hydrate. It's a mixture of methane and water that freezes in the pipes when it gets cold. We had an issue up in the Ohio, Pennsylvania issue this winter, and what it was is some kids threw a rock through some windows and a pump house froze up, and we weren't able to provide enough natural gas turbines to provide electricity on the power grid. And that's caused some issues with PJM and charging higher energy prices in this part of the country.
Wow, quite a butterfly effect there.
Yeah. It goes back to when you have these centralized systems, it only takes one thing to basically cause a chain reaction it's a complexity issue is what it is. If I can get you to go to the next one. I understand I've talked about things that most people don't know about, or they misdiagnose it or misdescribe it, I guess, and they have their own reasons for doing it. But what this is down at Cheniere Sabine Pass LNG facility that's down in Corpus Christi, they use gas turbines to power the pumps. At the facility, they use chains of compressors and fractionating columns to separate natural gas into separate gas streams. First of all, I have to describe there's an effect called a supercritical fluid. And what it is simply this. A lot of things, for example, water is actually supercritical fluid. You have to keep water under 1 bar of pressure to make it a fluid. If you had a glass of water on Mars on the surface, the water would simply boil away because there's not enough air pressure on Mars to keep it a liquid. A lot of gases like propane, butane, hydrogen, ethane, methane, carbon dioxide, if you compress them, you can compress them until they turn into a liquid. And there's a lot of things that you've probably seen in your life where you've actually experienced, like you pick up a canister of butane, you shake it, and you can hear a fluid inside of it. So what they'll do is they'll take the first stage compressors, compress it to 50 psi, and that turns butane into a supercritical fluid. Then 150 psi to separate out the propane, and then 220 psi to separate out the hydrogen, 550 psi to separate out nitrogen, 650 psi separate any oxygen, and then 750 psi to separate ethane, 950 psi to separate methane out, and the last is 2000 psi to push the CO2 into pipeline systems. So if you compress carbon dioxide greater than 1,055 psi, it turns into a fluid. Now that will be an important step later on. They compress multiple gases into supercritical fluids that they can be separated. The process of compressing gases generates lots of heat. Each one of the trains has many cooling fans. You can see all the fans on top there, and that's actually a train of compressors that actually compress those gases into a fluid. So they've kind of misdescribed how they make LNG. They make it sound like they super chill it or something to turn it into this liquid. The truth is they compress it into that state. The oil and gas industry has blamed the Biden administration for the ban on building new LNG export facilities. The truth is the bankers don't want to finance it. The existing gas grid is a risk to paying back LNG export facilities. A governor or a president can claim national security issues or risk of basically stop them from exporting LNG. So the truth is we're probably not going to get any more LNG export utilities because the bankers won't finance it because they have this fear that they're not going to be paid back for all this very expensive infrastructure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Do you want the next slide?
Please, yeah, but they don't describe it that way, you know.
yeah, that's true. That is good that you clarified that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they don't. You know, they basically blame it on Biden. The truth is the bankers won't finance it. That's the truth. Mm-hmm. I talk about the ammonia process. The Haber-Bosch process is plagued by too low pressure. The process for making ammonia favors higher pressures at lower temperatures. At 200 bar, which is what that system there is, at 200 bar, that's 290 psi. The main reactor must be heated up to 450 degrees Celsius. That's 842 degrees Fahrenheit. Just to get the iron catalyst to react with the nitrogen and hydrogen. The efficiency of the process at 200 bar is only 19%. The above process used massive amounts of natural gas due to the need to bring the steam reformer to 500 degrees and the Haber-Bosch reactor to 450 degrees. And I've got here a note at 1,000 bar, which is 15,000 psi. The Haber reaction occurs at 21 degrees Celsius. That's 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's room temperature, by the way, and is 90% efficient. Just by increasing the main process loop pressure can yield a large increase in efficiency and safety. It also means that you won't have to use as much natural gas to do the process. I can show you the next one. So I'm just pointing out how inefficient the process is. Go ahead.
Dan, could you also talk a little bit about the use of ammonia besides for fertilizer? It can also be used in turbines, right? In gas turbines.
We can use it in gas turbines. There's also a way to burning it in diesel engines also. So the point is ammonia is not just a fertilizer, but can also be used as a fuel and fueling a lot of different processes.
And it makes all of our military explosives, right?
You can turn ammonia into nitric acid and then basically, high explosives. Yes, that's true.
So all of the blowing apart we see on the television every night ultimately depends on this process or
well understand everything in our modern society has dual uses, can be used for good things and bad things. It's no different than a kitchen knife. You can use it to cut up your food or you can kill somebody with it. I mean, you got to understand there's a lot of things that are dual purpose. Stan and I did a whole show just on the ammonia thing and the history of Carl Bosch and Professor Haber, and we talk about a lot of the issues in that show.
World War I and all that.
Right. We're literally what caused World War I. Yeah, you're one of the few people that actually know what actually caused World War I. So anyway, if I can get the next slide.
Yeah. Oh, I just had another question about this.
Sure.
So why? Could you elaborate a little more why the bankers are afraid of investing in more of this infrastructure?
Well, it's okay. The easiest way to describe this is to describe this versus something else. Okay, so for example, let's say in Libya or in the Middle East, you have what's called a stranded asset. And what that means is you've got an oil well or oil field that you deposit all the oil. And what the last thing left in there is the natural gas. They use natural gas to actually push the oil to the surface. So the problem is, like in Libya, there's no natural customer for the natural gas, right? So therefore, basically, the banker knows they're going to get all their money back when you build that LNG export facility. The problem here in the United States is we have this vast natural gas system. And all it would take is a president or a governor to say, due to national security reasons, I'm not willing to let my constituents freeze to death. Therefore, all the gas goes to the homes in my state and can't be exported.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So the natural gas reserves are low enough that we might get to that point soon.
We could. We could. I mean, there's a probability that could happen, but that all depends on consumption. If our economy is really booming, we consume a lot more natural gas. We hit that peak a lot sooner. If the economy is in a recession or is really low, then we consume less, and therefore it extends out that peak point. Okay. But the point is that the technical term the bankers use is called force majeure. Force majeure, meaning is the government said I can't export the LNG, therefore I can violate contracts.
Okay, I see. So, and that's what they're afraid of. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So, I'm going to understand how I do this. I put a lot of pieces out there, and at the very end, I kind of put the picture together, because that's really what I'm good at, is actually putting very complex puzzles together. This talks about the IMO 2020 fuel standard. IMO stands for International Maritime Organization. They govern the cargo container ships, the oil tankers, and the LNG ships out on the world's oceans. The International Maritime Organization 2020 fuel standard took effect in January 2020. The shipping industry had a choice of changing from bunker fuel to natural gas, LSFO, or installing scrubbers on the world's commercial ships. Most chose the path of least resistance. They burn a fuel comprised of number 2 diesel. Low sulfur fuel oil is 2 parts number 2 diesel and 1 part fuel oil. Nobody bothered to change the refinery. So understand, low sulfur fuel oil, they actually take number 2 diesel and fuel oil, they blend them together, and that's what they're putting on the ships. And understand that happened in January of 2020, and there was an inflection point in the world's trade with the globalized economic system, and everybody sort of has a lot of theories about what actually caused it. They talk about the supply chains breaking down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but the real thing that caused it was this. If I can go to the next page, please.
And the laws of supply and demand tell you that if you've got ships that are cruising the world's oceans moving things around, and trucks on the land moving things with diesel, and now all of a sudden you're taking diesel and mixing it in to make the fuel for ships, that's also going to impact the demand on diesel and the price of diesel.
Yeah. Okay. If I go to the next page.
Okay.
Okay. Understand this is from the Energy Information Agency. There it is, right there down at the bottom. And that blue line, there are actual supplies of diesel that's actually in storage up there at Cushing, Oklahoma. The ships order fuel by the ton. Truckers purchase fuel by the gallon. Nobody made change to the refineries. After the this year, when we shut down the 2 refineries, and by the way, Chevron and Valero actually think about closing down 2 more. So we might just not lose 2 refineries. We might actually lose 4 refineries by the end of the year. That'll actually cause this diesel shortage to become even that much more acute. And remember, everything that gets shipped to the Walmart runs on diesel. Jet fuel is a form of diesel. Go ahead.
What do they do with the extra bunker?
They just pass it through the refinery. There's a joke about bunker fuel, and Stan and I talk about this. What bunker is this: you take a barrel, you drape a sheet over it, you pour crude oil through it. That's what bunker is. There's not much refining when they make bunker. The problem with these other fuels like diesel and so forth, they actually have to pass it through the refinery, and there's a cost to doing that, and that increases the cost of the fuel. And now we've got this extra demand for diesel, and it's competing with all the stuff that's already in land that uses diesel. And that also includes jet aircraft. Jet fuel is actually a form of highly refined diesel fuel. Okay.
Just a point of clarification. So this is diesel shortage since 2020.
Yep.
And so,
well, you can that graph there shows, that gray area shows the historical where our storage of diesel has been in the past, and since 2020, the diesel in storage has actually been at a low historically, and that blue line there actually depicts how low the diesel we have in storage is right now compared to what it has been historically in the past.
Okay, and then the bottom is 100 here, million barrels. Okay. Next slide.
Yep. Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so the reason why I put this together, I tried to describe the gasoline economy, or basically the size of the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry is truly global. It has supply chains that stretch around the planet. From the oil field by truck, train, piper ship to the refinery, from the refinery by truck, train, piper ship back to the customer. This global supply system allows the oil and gas industry to normalize the cost of producing fuel across the entire planet. This allows economies of scale to reduce the cost of fossil fuels for vast parts of the world population. So understand probably 100 years ago when Standard Oil started, the oil fields were here in America, the refineries here in America. World War I and World War II were basically fought on East Texas crude, by the way. So it was a self-contained supply chain system. The oil and gas industry today is actually stretched around the planet. So any interruptions in this global supply chain causes problems. It goes back to complexity theory. All it takes is one small element to to cause a chain reaction loss and shut down large elements of this system.
Okay. Next slide.
Next one. So this is actually the what came out of the company, a shipping company. Okay, so on Monday, March 10, 2025, the Stena Immaculate oil tanker, while anchored waiting to be unloaded off the coast of Scotland, was struck by a cargo container vessel. The Stena Immaculate was carrying 220,000 barrels of jet fuel for the U.S. Military Sea Lift Command. This fuel was destined for the U.S. military assets in the European theater. No questions? Actually, the next one will make the point. Okay, that's a burning tanker. Unfortunately, one man missing. All the rest were safely rescued. But this incident highlights a vulnerability the U.S. military has been working to reduce or eliminate since World War II. The bad guys know the same thing that we do. We don't have to take on the M1 Abrams main battle tank. You just have to destroy the fuel truck. You just have to destroy the fuel chain. The oil and gas industry supply chain is a tactical nightmare for the U.S. military. So the United States around the world, that's because the oil and gas industry is a global business. That's why. I understand that's not necessarily a positive for the military. That's what I'm right. I understand. I point out a lot of different people's, at the end, I bring it together. Yeah. Any comments, Dan?
How do you spell Hootie?
Yeah.
We did a show on that too, by the way. We did a show about that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is it an accident or is it a military action?
I think the next slide.
Okay, next slide. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what the oil and gas industry's future plans are. And when I go into talking about the future plans, I'm going to touch on a sensitive subject for a lot of people, and that has to do with the Hubble curve and King Hubbard and his curve, and we'll talk about aspects about that. Next page, please. Okay. So you can see that's from ExxonMobil. So back in 2022, Saudi Arabia came out with a similar report stating they needed $10 trillion investment in over 5 years just to maintain oil production. They cite the lack of new oil field discoveries as the underlying issue. In August of 2024, Exxon published the above report stating the same issues. Unfortunately, the public has concluded the oil and gas industry is trying to extort the rest of the world. So I want to take a good look at that. That's oil supply and gas supply. And what they're saying, without more investments in existing fields, production is going to drop. And the bigger issue is we haven't discovered any new Guars out there, new Permians out there. And by the way, it's really hard to hide oil fields at large because they're pretty big.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yep. Okay.
Next. Okay, no, the reason why I show this is because I try to describe my backyard where I can actually talk about things. So I only talk about things I can actually physically touch, understand. I'm an engineer. I have engineers that work for me. I've got companies. My backyard is New Albany and Marcellus shale fields between Indiana and Ohio. By the way, the Michigan has 16,000 depleted oil and gas wells and fields, if you didn't know. When they built the Standard Refinery, what was feeding the refinery is actually the state of Michigan. I spent some teenage summers in Sinclair, Wyoming, helping my cousins on various projects out of Wyoming. So I can talk about some stuff in Wyoming.
Where's the Permian?
Down in Texas, down in that corner between New Mexico and Texas.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, when the people talk about the Permian, the Eagle Ford, I put this graphic up there so that way everybody knows where the shale is, where the oil fields are, where the gas
I was
is.
being stupid. Yeah. I was looking in Arizona.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Arizona's a bit dry in a lot of different ways. So yeah. Anyway, next one, please.
Mm-hmm. I was just noticing here that this basin, the Appalachian Basin, seems much bigger than the Permian Basin, but
it seems. But we're going to talk about that basin and what it actually is. It's more gas than oil. But anyway, we'll talk about that. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this graphic here. And if you notice up here in the top part, you got the Burnett and Fayetteville. The dots are the computer models, and the gray is the actual production numbers. And you can tell both those shale oil gas fields are currently in terminal decline. And then you got the ones below that, the Bakken and the Eagle Ford. So the geologists hate M. Kimmy Hubbard's oil production curve. Hubert based this curve on empirical data. It's not a geological theory. It's based on the interaction between human beings and geology. Unfortunately, that means the production of any oil field is unpredictable due to human interactions. The Barnett and Fayetteville shale fields are in terminal decline. The Bakken and Eagle Ford are still up in the air. The Bakken and Eagle Ford graphs clearly show the interactions of humans and the geology. The graphs are from Gowin and Rochering, so they actually keep track of this. And well, my point to everybody is the reason why the graphs on the bottom are all over the place is because the geologists and the drillers became aware that the Barnett and Fayetteville were in terminal decline, and they did everything they could to break that trend. The other thing is, I want you to remind everybody that probably my best examples will be things that happened down in South America, where they brought an oil field online, an army marched across the border, killed the drillers, and therefore the production, dropped off the cliff. So you're trying to describe an interaction between human beings and geology, right? So therefore, because of that, inherently, you're not going to be able to use the Hubert curve to basically to predict production, and it's because of the interaction of human beings and how ingenious human beings can be. And we're going to talk about some of the ingenuity that's out there.
Why did geologists hate the Hubbard curve? Or Hubbard called himself a geophysicist?
Well, because there are people that are not geologists that try to use the Hubbard curve to project the production out of an oil field. But the geologists know that what he's actually describing is the interaction between human beings and geology. It's not a pure geological theory. They want pure geological theories, but it's not but you got interaction between humans and geology that actually dictate this curve. And a lot of things human beings can do can change the shape of the curve. That's what Art Berman was trying to explain to everybody during the last meeting. It's hard for the geologist to articulate.
Berman is not worried about the future of oil, but you sound like you are.
Well, let's talk about the future. And when I get to the end, I'll put the pieces together and I'll show you what the future will look like. Okay. Let me get the next one, please. Next page.
Isn't this it?
Okay, there we go. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so understand. In 2017, Citizens Energy, formerly Indiana Gas of Evansville, sold this oil and gas field to CenterPoint Energy of Houston, and I was given the operations contract. I have a few engineers in Louisville that visit the facility there in Evansville. It's an oil and gas field down in southern Indiana. I subcontracted out the well and pump house services to Rural Oilfield Services of Odessa, Texas. My staff maintains the SCADA devices for feeding data into the State Department of Natural Resources. So this is publicly available data. You can go out to the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. There's a well finder, and that'll tell you what type of well it is. You can click on it. It'll tell you who actually owns the well, who owns the rights, what their royalties are getting paid. Of course, the state's making royalty money on it also. And then the other systems, we actually record the data coming out of the system and it gets fed into the Department of Energy and other data sets like Gowin and Rochering, they actually data mine the data. Every spring we pump natural gas up from Texas and store it in our gas storage wells for winter heating and electricity. The Evansville oil and gas field is in terminal decline. The other assets I manage is the Shelbyville gas field in Shelbyville, Indiana. Most of the oil and gas fields I manage were discovered in the 1890s. That's important to remember that a lot of these wells were drilled in the 1890s and they're still producing today. So that'll give you an idea how long-lived, these resources can be. In the past, I made predictions about the Petersburg coal-fired power plant being converted to combined cycle gas turbine. The conversion this year, it's projected to be completed by the spring of 2026. The cause for conversion, the coal in Indiana, has been mined out. Next one, please. Okay, this is from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Understand the data I feed into this system, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources actually shows this on their website. The system I manage extends the Marcellus Shale in eastern Ohio. The Devonian Shale in eastern Ohio is over 20,000 feet deep. That's over 6 kilometers. At these steps, the temperatures and pressures are high enough to crack large hydrocarbons into molecules. into small molecules like methane and ethane. It's a Mother Nature's cracker unit. The Marcellus mostly yields gas and condensates. There are 22 documented cases where horizontally drilled wells were too close together. And during the fracking, the secondary wellheads were blown off with water shooting out of the ground at 148 degrees Celsius. That's 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So,
Wow.
So what I'm describing to you is that because this shale is at 20,000 feet, the temperatures and pressures are too high enough. The only thing you get out of the appellation is just gas, and the reason why is because the shale is too deep. For crude oil to actually form, it has to be shallower than 10,000 feet deep, right? So that tells you a lot about the world's crude oil is being depleted, because understand the oil and gas industry, they've already located where that shallow hydrocarbons are located at, and the stuff that isn't that great, like the Marcellus shale, all you get out of it is gas. It's because it's too deep. The Royal Oilfield Services, they own the drill rigs. They're called 6-kilometer drill rigs. Drillers charged by the meter, if you didn't know that. Most people don't. It's becoming more expensive to produce shale gas. 10 years ago, the laterals were only 4,000 feet. That's 20,000 feet of vertical pipe casing and 4,000 feet of horizontal, for a total of 24,000 feet of steel pipe in the ground. Today's laterals are over 25,000 feet with 20,000 feet of vertical, for a total of 45,000 feet of steel pipe in the ground. So in other words, 10 years ago, we had 24,000 feet of casing in the ground. Today, we have 45,000 feet of casing in the ground. The life of the well is expected to be only 3 years. We're getting only 2/3 as much gas as we did 10 years ago, as rated per drilled foot. So what I'm trying to tell you is the costs are going up, and we're getting less hydrocarbons out of the ground.
Mhm.
And so you can chart that and figure out that sooner or later something's going to collide. It's going to be the economics are going to keep us from getting at those hydrocarbons. So as much as Art might be frustrated, hey, there's hydrocarbons in the ground, economically we can't get at them.
Mhm.
Go to the next one.
And I just wanted to add that this is an important point for all the abiotic oil enthusiasts, that if it's too deep, you simply don't have oil.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, you don't. The pressures, I mean, the deeper you drill, the temperatures and pressures go up. Understand that the continent, and I'll talk about this in number 2 presentation, but understand the continental United States, the crust we're all living on is 43 kilometers thick. Under that is molten rock. Out in Hawaii, off the coast of Hawaii, the crust is only 6 kilometers thick, and under that is molten rock. And that's what that volcano is there in Hawaii, shooting live lava out of the ground, is because there's a crack in that crust, and that's what's coming out of the ground. But the point is, you don't have abiotic oil. If you believe in abiotic oil, let me take you out to Hawaii. Let me show you what's actually coming out of a depth 20 kilometers underground. That molten rock is coming out. I've heard that whole thing. It's rather puzzling. If I can get you to go to the next one, please.
That sets us up good for the next presentation.
Yeah. So what I'm going to show you is a CO2 system that basically started building this back in the 90s. Okay, liquid CO2 is supercritical CO2. When CO2 is compressed to 1,055 psi, it turns into a supercritical fluid. These CO2 pipelines are pressurized to 2,000 psi. The CO2 pipeline system is advertised as CO2 sequestration. At these pressures, CO2 is used as a solvent. As a good example, they use supercritical CO2 to remove caffeine from coffee beans. So I'm going to talk about Wyoming, but what they actually use the CO2 is they use it to, when an oil field, when you've taken all the oil out of it and you removed all the natural gas, right? The last thing they do is they pump in supercritical CO2 as a solvent to actually leach the hydrocarbons out of the ground. So I'm going to talk about Wyoming because I know that best of all. I don't know much about what's going on down the Permian, but I can tell you exactly what's going on there in Wyoming. Okay, so Salt Creek oil field was discovered in 1889, and by 1935 it had run dry. Since 2004, Halliburton Oilfield Services has been attempting to resurrect the production of the oil field. The oil field is located 20 miles north of Casper, Wyoming. The pipeline system in Wyoming is designed to pump supercritical CO2 in the Salt Creek oil field. It's known as enhanced oil recovery with CO2. The CO2 is captured in a natural gas facility nearby La Bridge Field. In 2016, the CO2 was leaking from an abandoned well in the field and led it to its temporary closure. I think it's still temporary closed, Stan.
Yeah.
How long has this temporary closure been?
2016. It was temporarily closed in 2016.
Okay,
So they're no longer leaching hydrocarbons out of the deposit. They're no longer leaching asphalt out of the deposit. So if you want to know what's left in there, it's basically asphalt.
So essentially, we're using CO2 to enhance our oil production, and there's kind of a push to do this more broadly across the continental U.S. Correct?
That's what we're going to talk about. The next slides, yeah.
Mm.
I get you go next one. So I was notified 3 years ago that the Heartland Greenway pipeline by Navigator CO2 would be extending down to the Evansville oil and gas field for enhanced oil recovery with CO2. So I understand they tell the public it's CO2 sequestration. What they don't tell you is they're sequestering the supercritical CO2 into an oil and gas field. So there we've got Springfield, Illinois. So the pipeline is going to extend all the way down to the Evansville pipeline, which is in that southwest quarter there of Indiana. If I can get you the next one. Okay. Yep. So here's what they're planning to do. They plan to leach hydrocarbons out of the already fracked shale fields with supercritical CO2, enhance oil recovery with CO2, source the CO2 as ethanol plants, power plants, oil refineries. Projected cost about $5 trillion. So they're projected to complete it in 2030, but I don't think it's going to happen that way.
So let's summarize that we have pressurized CO2 potentially spidering all the way across, especially the eastern U.S. and central U.S. And what happens when pressurized CO2 is in a valley and comes to the surface because of a damaged pipe or something? It sits in the valley, right? And you can't breathe.
Well, you already know, Stan, we've already had some instances like down in Louisiana where we had a pipeline rupture, and a lot of people, we're in a medical situation, and we had EMT people driving into the incident zone, and their cars died, and they pass out in their vehicle. So that's already happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are, are upset because a lot of this is farmland, and they're putting these pipelines through farmland and basically forcing easements that happen to go through, a big farm, and don't tell people that, this is a CO2 pipeline, and they can't understand what's going on. They see a fog in a little swale or a valley. They drive in there, and like Dan says, then it's a medical emergency. Then the law enforcement medical guys, if they're alerted, show up to basically a fatality, and then they themselves become affected by CO2. And so this is getting kind of to be the pressure to make this happen is pretty stiff, and I don't think the general public understands the threat.
And then you use the oil and the CO2 that it's sort of dissolved in, goes off into the atmosphere anyway. So there's no net sequestration.
Well, what oil and gas fields? What those are actually? It's actually water. So you have a production well and an injection well. So, for example, in an oil field, what comes out of the ground is salt water, and they put in a separatory tank, separate out the oil, and they inject the salt water back into the ground. In this case here, they're injecting supercritical CO2. It's 2,000 psi. It's a fluid. It's an actual fluid at those pressures, and it's a solvent, and it leaches those hydrocarbons out, and it comes out of production well. They release the pressure, and then they got their hydrocarbons. But when they release the pressure, do they re-inject it back down in the ground, or did they just release it into the atmosphere? That's kind of the question.
So it's a choice at that point.
Well, the thing is I'm not sure this is going to happen. If I can go to the next page, I'll explain to you what's going on. Okay, and many of the CO2 pipeline projects have been canceled. For example, that Navigator CO2 Ventures, the Heartland Greenway pipeline, it's been canceled. If you want to know what's happening, it's actually the farmers are rising up. And understand, if you're a politician in a farm state and you go against the farmers, you're not going to be a politician for very long. So a lot of these pipelines are being canceled actually by the farmers, because they don't want this going across their land. The Department of Energy has this pipeline system listed as a hazardous gas pipeline. That ought to tell you something right there. They have to have a special license even to put it in the ground. They don't have to have a license to put natural gas pipelines in the ground, but they have to have a special license just to put CO2 pipeline in the ground.
Yeah, because methane, it just goes up into the atmosphere, but CO2.
Right, it's not dangerous to the environment, because there's a lot of environmental things that emit methane, like rotting vegetable matter or swamps or whatever. But CO2 is a different story.
Yeah. And I want to just add that, a lot of the companies trying to push these pipelines through on easements on farmland aren't telling the farmers that it's a hazardous, situation. And that's why it's kind of a nefarious thing going on. By the time the people realize that there's a dangerous situation developing on their own property, it's a little bit late. They've already signed off on the easements, the legal documents, and they can do it.
Yep. Next one, please.
Oh, can you see it?
We haven't got to the next one. There we go. There we go. So that's down to the Gulf of America. That's what we call it. In the area in green was supposed to be 2 offshore oil fields to come online this year and next. Both have been delayed to 2026, 2027, respectively. Total forecasted production is 250,000 barrels per day. Can they bring the cost down? Can the price of oil rise to break even? So what I'm showing you, here's oil production that's being delayed due to economics, meaning is can they bring the cost of production down? And is the price of oil too low? So when the price of oil is below $70, in fact, the break even for shale is $74 per barrel. If there's less than $74, they cut back on rigs. If it's greater than $74, they increase rigs. This offshore oil right here, it requires $90 plus to make it economical. So it goes back to there's hydrocarbons out there, but how are you going to bring it to the market when you can't break even? You can't make the economics work.
Right, because if the price goes too high, then there's demand destruction, like you were saying.
Right,
earlier.
right. They stop driving is what happens. I understand the oil and gas industry in this sort of teeter-totter. If the price is too high, people stop driving. But the prices can't be too low because they can't pay for all the machinery and all the engineering requires to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this here is up in Alaska. So everybody talks about what's in Alaska, but they never actually show you any actual maps or show you exactly what's going on. So in the upper corner there, that's the Alaska pipeline that goes from Prudhoe Bay down there, Anchorage. So you've got there, the Alpine is supposed to come online in 2030, projected 80,000 barrels per day. So up in the left-hand side, you can see Alpine there, and that's a new oil field they're supposed to bring online. And you can see there's 3 different boxes there. There's Kodiak, Alpine East, Alpine West. Okay. The future of Kodiak, Alpine East, and Alpine West is uncertain. For Pantheon to drill, for the cost of drilling one well is $25 million. If you want to know how these guys do business, you don't just drill one well, you have to drill minimum 9 wells. So that means for them to bring Kodiak production online, of course, tie into the Alaska oil pipeline, that means they need a starting capital of $225 million just to drill the 9 wells. And of course, the odds are you're always going to have some dry wells. This figures into it too. Okay, so due to the financing issues with there's an Alaska natural gas pipeline that they've been trying to build the last 4 years. So they've got the governor of Alaska has been going down to Japan and Korea trying to get financing to put in the gas pipeline, the LNG facility there in Anchorage. So basically, what's stopping? So there's plenty of hydrocarbons in the ground, but because the costs, right, they're not able to bring into market. So the state of Alaska, the last 4 years, they had the Army Corps of Engineers do the engineering analysis, originally designed and so forth. They were going to put an LNG pipeline right next to the oil pipeline to bring LNG to the market. The banks weren't willing to finance it. So now the governor of Alaska is down in Japan and Korea pining for money. The point being is there's hydrocarbons in the ground, but they can't get the capital to actually bring it to market.
And just like the Louisiana slide before, this is not a friendly place to work. It's extremely cold in the winter. Everybody, likes to think Alaska is cold all over, but down in Anchorage, it's not too bad in the winter. But you get up to this part, it's like 50 below zero, 60 below zero sometimes, and that doesn't help trying to do heavy equipment operation and things like that. So
the other thing about this, most people don't realize that when the crude oil comes out of the ground, or that it's actually salt water comes out of the ground, but this stuff is hot when it comes out of the ground, right? But they have to keep letting it flow, because if you turn the well off, what happens is the wellhead freezes.
Right.
And then what you have to do is go out there and re-drill into production. So when you drill one of these things and it's producing, you got to keep it running, because otherwise you'll end up with another 20. And understand it costs you $25 million to drill one well. So if I can get you the last page there.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I understand it's the same for the pipeline. If you don't keep enough oil flowing in it.
Yeah, and the natural gas pipeline, because remember the methane hydrate issue I deal with here in Indiana, because there's water mixed in with the methane that it'll freeze in the pipe. So you got the same problem with the gas pipeline system. So understand this was the peak oil was the topic of the March 13th CERAWeek conference. They talked about basically peak oil and financing. Now understand what they told the public was there's a spat between the International Energy Agency and the Saudi Arabians and maximum consumption or peak consumption, I guess, of oil, whatever. The truth is, guys, what they were talking about behind closed doors was how we, there's no way they're going to be able to meet the President Trump's $50 target. If the price of oil goes below 50, those drillers start going bankrupt. And understand it happened before. In January of 2020, the United States, we had over 1,600 drill rigs across the country. And April 21st of 2020, the price of oil dropped to minus $37 a barrel. And why that happened is we had all these tankers out in the middle of the Gulf that are loaded up with oil. If you know anything about the tanker business, that's actually a rental business. People were paying rent on oil sitting in tankers out in the Gulf, and we're paying people to take the oil off their hands. Well, whenever the price of oil dropped that low, it set off a chain reaction of bankruptcies. So we went from 1,600 drill rigs down to 382 drill rigs by July of 2021. So if you want to know why the drillers don't want to even think about producing or over drilling or drilling too fast, right? It's because they already watched, 2/3 of the industry go bankrupt over what happened in 2020. So even though President Trump wants $50 oil, he's not going to get it. So what I'm trying to tell, what all the pieces come together says, as the costs rise, they're going to have problems selling their product, is what I'm trying to tell you. That's really what's going on.
Yeah. Nice job, Dan.
Thank you, sir. This is a story that Stan and I have been trying to explain for a lot of years. I know we've talked to Peter about it, that because they were talking about, will they run out of oil? And my point is, no, they'll run out of money. Because the good way I can describe it would be like the old gold mines out in the old West. I can take you to places where you can pan a stream, you'll find gold. But to actually mine it and bring it to market, it's not economical. You'll spend more money on diesel and dynamite than the amount of gold you'll get out of the ground. And the oil and gas business is going to go the same thing. This is what happened to the coal industry. 20 years ago, the bankers knew that we were going to run out of bitumen coal, and therefore we're not willing to finance coal-fired power plants, and that's why they switched to gas turbine. I understand those power plants is already in place. You've already paid off the loan. You've already depreciated the asset. All we did is modify it by adding a gas turbine. A Hertzog is heat recovery steam generator, generates steam, and we rebuilt the steam turbines. One of the few energy infrastructures we have out there are steam turbines. Some of the turbines I worked on were built during the time of George Westinghouse back in the 1890s. So those machines last a long time. But the thing about it is that what's going to take a lot of this out is really banking. I know Stan and I have been talking about a lot of issues with our businesses really center around financing and banking. That's the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. And so I see Dusty has a question, and then Charlie. Go ahead, Dusty. Okay, whoa. Dusty's having some trouble unmuting.
There we go.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to say thanks, Dan, for that presentation. That was great. And Stan, Dan and Stan, oh, that rhymes. It's really refreshing to have people that know the oil and gas industry well to do a presentation like that. And I was just going to ask, in your presentation, you probably have it in other areas, you didn't really go into the what's typically called the byproducts industries. And a lot of people, don't understand how interconnected they are, asphalt, plastics, pharmaceuticals, all these other products that we get from that.
I didn't go into that presentation. Presentation number 2, I'll go into some of that. But Stan and I have done shows. We've got out on Auto Rumble. It's called Awesome 44, and Stan will send out the link to the energy show him and I do. But we talk into all the uses of natural gas, from all the guys that use, for example, the ethylene they turn into high density polyethylene plastic, which is your plastic bottles. To, for example, I talk about Eli Lilly here in Indianapolis as a drug manufacturer, and the starting place for a lot of drugs is something called syngas really comes from hydrocarbons. But even, for example, the tomatoes that you see in your store, what they do is they actually pick the tomatoes green, and right before you see it on the store shelf, what they do is they take the tomatoes, put it in a big box, expose it to natural gas, and there's a molecular trigger in the tomato that causes it to ripen and turn red. So understand, those tomatoes in the store, that is not naturally ripened. They use natural gas to actually cause it to ripen before they just put it on the shelf. And so most people don't realize that those tomatoes are actually picked green. If you've actually been a gardener, you actually grow tomatoes, starting about August is when the tomatoes start going ripe, and they keep going ripe until October. But then it goes back to, how am I getting ripe tomatoes in March? Well, they must be from California or whatever. And the truth is, no, they grew them green, and they transporting them to the store, and just before delivery, they do that natural gas trick. So there's an example of somebody that uses natural gas.
Yeah, it's perfect. And what I'm very curious about is the cost correlations between, once you have the main products, gas, diesel, et cetera, LNG, when those are at risk, then what happens to the byproducts industries or the other use cases? Is the oil and gas companies, do they collapse, or are they able to get subsidies to be able to keep their byproducts industry, to keep them afloat? That's kind of my question.
Well, to answer your question, the piece of the system that's going to be around a long time will probably be that natural gas system, because how an oil field, because since I've got some ones that I work in my backyard that have been around for 100 years, how oil goes, basically what they do is they use the natural gas to pressure the oil to the surface, and then they just pump the oil. And basically, after they've depleted the oil, I had a saying, and the saying was, when it comes to oil fields, the last thing to pass through the wellhead is natural gas. Well, now I'm going to have to amend my saying, say, no, the last thing to pass through the wellhead is actually CO2. So understand that methane and ethane are simple molecules. So there's actually more of that than there is of the oil. So yeah, the other thing is there are actually alternatives to the system that you're talking about. I'll talk about that in presentation number 2, what the alternatives are. And I'll talk about industries that have actually existed before the world of oil and gas. I understand your concern, but let's wait till presentation number 2, and I'll talk about here's all the
Okay. Perfect. And then Charlie probably wants to talk about the correlation between EROI and
let's let Charlie.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Indeed. My minor claim to fame, or maybe not that minor, is energy return on investment. And everything you're talking about is how energy is used before it's delivered.
Right.
And I'm too old now. I would love to do an EROI assessment of the whole.
Charlie, I'm going to tell you right now. I agree with you already 100%, because I'll sit there and tell you, when I talk about this financing thing, that really says that if I'm expending a barrel of oil to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, guess what? It's not happening. That's another way of saying it is the financing. Yeah. They're not able to do the financing. Yep.
Is this recorded, and may I distribute it?
Yeah, it's recorded, and you can distribute it. Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. I'll send you the link after.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Well, all that you say is obvious to me, but you know much more about the details. It's marvelous.
Well, the reason why I talk about this, because it's not put in those terms. When you talk about like EROI, it's kind of an abstract concept, and it doesn't go across
not
easily
to me.
to the public. But I got that. There's a lot of people that say money is equal to energy, but it's hard to explain that. But when I explain the financing, then it makes sense. Why are they not pulling the oil then off the Gulf of Mexico? Because the cost. What's the break even? If I can't make my money back, why would I even do it? And it's the same thing in Alaska. They'll talk about, there's plenty of stuff up in Alaska. When I say it's $25 million a well, what is the break even cost of that oil? That's the issue. And when oil is $100, $150 a barrel, and you're trying to pay for $12, $15 gasoline, what does that mean? It means you're not driving. You're not buying that gas because it's too expensive.
And the first flush of of the fracked gas, of the fracked oil, had a high EROI, up to, according to Adam Brandt, up to 30 or 40 to 1. But now we've used up the good stuff, and the question is, what will be the EROI of the remaining?
That's it. But I've
stuff?
already given you a good example of actual drilling over in Ohio. Like I said, when they first drilled those wells, they were putting 24,000 feet of steel, 5-inch casing steel pipe in the ground.
Yeah.
Now we're putting 45,000. We're putting twice as much steel in the ground, and we're getting less gas out of the ground. So there's a good example. We're putting in more EOI, more energy, and getting less out of it. But I'm using terms like putting steel pipe, real tangible things people can grasp. All it's requiring more energy to get less out of the ground.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I just try to actually show you actual examples of that really in action, not this abstract idea that the public has a hard time grasping. I can actually say steel pipe, actual steel pipe in the ground.
Yeah, I think in the next presentation we're going to also talk about opportunity cost, which is another aspect of that whole discussion.
Simon actually has very tangible ore samples of the high grade ore. I don't know, Simon, are you hearing us?
Hi.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, hi.
Could you show us?
Yeah. By the way, that presentation, Dan, was excellent. That was good stuff.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored by you saying that because you're a legend in this area, sir.
Right. Okay.
Whoa.
I've been tearing up the dance floor in metallurgical circuits for a while, and that's the kind of detail that is missing from these sort of debates.
Right.
So thanks, mate. More power to you.
Awesome, sir.
Strength your arm, and I'll buy you a beer next time I see you. Right. Okay. So I was actually asked to assemble some rocks. I'm a few things, but one of the things I am also is a geologist. Physics and geology was my basic degree, and then I went off and became a mining engineer and a PhD. Right. So every operation you go to, we all go and get a rock sample, and we put it on a shelf. It's like a serial killer collecting its, collecting your trophies. So I've got I've collected some. I've got a shed full of them. Yeah. So I'm not going to waste your time with idiosyncrasies, but I can show you things like. Okay, let's see if this works. This is high-grade copper ore. So, can you see?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. It's
okay. So
kind of greenish.
Okay, the greenish bit's actually a brass color.
Okay.
What's the percentage?
Okay. Well, this particular is quite high. I think this little bit is up to 10%, but it's part of an ore deposit which has an average grade of around 1%. So what happens is when imagine a fluid has been pushed through the rock as it's forming, like it's a fluid, and a temperature change or a pressure change happens, and the pressure and volume that's compressing on that fluid changes, and stuff's deposited. The chemical properties of that fluid changes, and things drop out of that fluid. And what often happens is sulfides will drop out, and gold, which is like a noble element, it's very hard to get hold of chemically. So gold will drop out when whatever was holding it in the fluid drops out, which is why you often see copper and gold together. So that gold stuff there is chalcopyrite, and that's the there's lots of different minerals. When you're actually mining stuff and you're tracking a mineral, and you want to take that mineral and then extract it and then refine it into an element. Right, so that's the ore. That's a high grade example. Ore, when you often see it, is often so low grade that you can't actually see the stuff in it. Like gold ore, when you look at it, okay, this is gold ore. Now you show that to anyone, they'll say that's like a kitchen benchtop. Yes, right, and so this is like this was relatively high grade. I think this was like about 0.5 grams a ton, but the grains are so small you can't see them with the naked eye.
Wow!
Right, they're really small. So you need to actually mine it and then send it off to an assay, and you need a reasonable sized rock to do it. And right, so back to copper. So that's the ore, and then goes through a process where we crush and grind it and get flotation. Use froth flotation to crush and grind it down to a powder so the minerals are actually completely liberated. Mix it up in a mixing tank. Put the equivalent of detergent in there that froths up with bubbles. Pump those bubbles through that solution, and copper is what's called hydrophobic. it wants to stick to, it does not want to stick to water. It hates water so much that it'll stick to a bubble of air as it passes. And so a lot of the copper will then float to the top, and that's the froth layer. The froth layer is taken off, and we've taken copper that's, I don't know, 0.1%, and you concentrate it to maybe 25%. We're going to then take that concentrate, put it in a smelter, and then we make what's called anodes. And this is a copper anode, which is about 99% copper, and we need 99.999% for electronic purposes. So this will go on to electrowinning to be purified further. So now this, in the good old days when they first started out in the United States and they came, copper nuggets, the pure copper boulders were in the streams, and so all that's really left is, this is what's called natural copper. So if we were to sort of, go to a stream and till it out with a pan and everything like that, little flakes of pure natural copper. Now, because copper oxidizes, if I was to clean this up with acid, for example, it would have that really sort of metallic copper look at it, but it oxidizes in the air. And so that's copper, natural copper. Hang on. Yep. Okay. So I also got. Okay, this is chromium ore.
Which ore?
Chromium.
Chromium. Okay.
Now, so this is relatively high grade ore. We're talking about like 0.2% chromium. Now, to get it, it's really deep. And you've got like what's called a magmatic deposit, where you've got like a big ball of magma, molten rock, and as it cools, the stuff at the boundary chemically changes and deposits certain metals as it cools. And so you've got this narrow bandwidth of, I think it's like only about 30 odd centimeters wide, and it's narrower again. They got to go down quite deep, and they selectively mine that out. And then they pull it up. There's also platinum in this, but the platinum's not economically.
That's actually a core sample from a drill rig, isn't it?
Yes. That's what I was saying.
That's what it looks like when they drill the deposit. They just drill it. Yeah.
So what I forgot to say is, every time I go to a site, I lift a sample, and yes, they're often out of the drill trays. Sometimes it's out of the pit, and usually what happens is, ooh, sparkly. Oh, that'll look nicely in my collection. And then it disappears. And then they mark it up and says, I don't get it. We had 2 meters of core here and there's only half a meter left. Oh, shit, look at them all. Right, so for shits and giggles, this is a really unusual sample. This is what I usually sort of hand this to people and say, tell me what you think this is. This is a sample taken off a black smoker by the Russian Navy off the bottom of the Black Sea. And it's about 35% copper.
Wow.
So this was one of those really unusual samples. And this is, again, samples are sent in for analysis. And ooh, sparkly, look at that. And yes, well, you like how magpies or crows will actually sort of take stuff to build their nest. And you open the door and there's all this crap that's come from it. Where did all this crap come from? Yeah, that's your classic geologist. And so right. So this was actually sort of slated to be like a black smoker deposit, and they thought, what if we mined this stuff? And so they went through the logistics of, if they went down to the bottom of the sea and mined it out and everything like that, the logistics and flow rate to get it off the seafloor into the sub and up to the surface and then off to a refinery weren't even close to being economical at 35%. Right, so the difficulties of mining under the sea.
At current prices.
This was in 2010.
Yeah.
So let's see.
When oil was cheaper, so it's probably even more expensive now.
In the beginning, when we were winning. So, right. So this is conventional copper ore. This is from a place called Ernest Henry. And again, I grabbed it because you can actually see the metallic sparkles. So what we're seeing there is pyrite. Now, pyrite is an ore with copper in it, but it's not very good for flotation. Chalcopyrite is the mineral we're after. So even though that's got copper in it, that's not very good for flotation. Right? The mineral we're after is chalcopyrite. And the pyrite's in there doesn't float very well and winds up in the waste and is a pain in the ass and all that. And so just because it's got copper in it doesn't mean we can float it. All and so on. So it becomes a chemistry handshake.
Not all copper is created equal. Not all ore is created equal. That same problem with coal. Not all coal is created equal. Yeah.
So this is for you, Dan. This is from the Hunter Valley. This is a piece of drill core that went through one of the coal streams. Gosh, which one was this? I forget the name of it now, but it's one of the coal mines in Hunter Valley, in Australia. And so this was actually what's called metallurgical coal, where it's high grade, calorifically high grade. It's over 6,000 calories.
And anthracite greater than 80%.
Yes. It's got lots of anthracite in it. It's not pure anthracite. It's higher grade.
Right.
And so all the stuff coal in Australia that's good and high grade has been spoken for. It's no longer Australian.
Yeah.
The Chinese and Americans own it all. So now this is one for the girls. You know, when they say diamonds are forever, where do diamonds come from, sweetheart? So this is a rock. Aha. In this rock, there is diamonds. Oh, right. So this is what's called rubber rock. Now, you've got to get through a lot of ore to actually get a jewelry grade diamond. Most of the diamonds in this are very small, and they're the sort of thing that wind up on sandpaper. So just because you've got say there's diamonds in it, is it useful? Probably not. Most of it's like industrial abrasives. And so again, this came from De Beers, and we did a job. I was supposed to crush it all and test its rock strength for comminution, and this bit fell off the back of a truck, and it's in my living room now. Right. So this is iron ore. So my PhD was in blasting of iron ore, and they sent me some lumps to blow up. This was too small, so I cut it up, and the idea was to make drink coasters out of it. So this it's about 30% iron, I suppose. It's quite heavy. This is from Western Australia, West Angeles. So this is the stuff where they'll blast it, but they want what's called lumps of about 20 millimeters in size, and so that'll go into the smelter. So they're trying to break it in a way where they have lots of particles this big, and the more fines are a problem because they cause problems in the smelter and the flue dust. When we do our grinding, this is the mineral processing side of things. When we've got like what's called a ball mill, you've got like a big metal cylinder, and rock that goes in it that's saying like minus 5 millimeters in size down, and we want to crush and grind it down to say 70 microns down. We've got a ball mill, and so you've got steel balls like this. And we did a mill survey, and when I was working for JK Tech, and when I was out there, and I did my usual, that'll look good in my shed, thanks. And so this is hilarious when you fly through an airport and you've got this in your backpack, right? You come with us, sir. That looks like a piece of plutonium, I'm
or
sorry,
a hand grenade.
This is my lucky cannonball. Shut up, sir. Yes. And so this is another lump of coal. This is actually sort of high ash content coal, so it tends to be a bit harder and less crumbly. I was in a rock breakage project, and we were actually getting a whole series of cubes, and what we would do is we'd map each face, and then we'd put 2 strain gauges on the side, and then we'd break it slowly over time and measure what strength it broke, and then match that up against the mineralogy. And that's why we've got lots of different cubes. I suppose I can come clean now after 20 years. What I was really doing was making dice. These are called my management dice. So when we get to a patch of ground, this is what do we do? Do we send it to the waste dump? Do we send it to the concentrator? Which stockpile? And so in a call of geometallurgy, instead of trying to like measure it and decide what to, just roll the dice. And so we've got things like dissolve it, the plasma mill, float it, lick it, grind it, map it, hide it because it's bad, ignore it, blast it, or the high pressure grinding roll. And then what we've got is called the management dice. Okay, what do we tell people what to do here? So what do we got? Smile and nod, send the memo, pass the buck, violently disagree, or passive resistance. Yeah. And so what you do is you take these three and you roll the dice, and suddenly you have your instructions, and your job is done. Right. Yeah, right. So now also part of our rock breakage process, we wanted like a range of hard rocks, soft rocks, and then we will put off like our ores in and amongst that. The ores are very complicated, so we would go after simpler rocks. This is marble. Now, being a complete bastard, I actually said, look, I need a soft rock. I want, for personally, I mean, for these rock breakage tests, Carrara marble from Italy, and they sent it to me.
Nice.
Several hundred kilograms. It got blown up. A lot of stuff fell off the back of the truck. And
Wow.
I've been making stuff out of it ever since. So this is the laser cutter at the local library.
Nice.
See, this is all 20 years ago, and no managers were hurt in this exposition, and everyone involved is now retired. Yeah. Anyway, so what else do we have? Yes.
Is there an international statute of limitations for stealing rocks?
I may have smoked, but I did not inhale. I did not have relations with that woman. So this is zinc ore. It's actually sort of high grade. You often see zinc with lead zinc together, and again we like the cube. Now, normally they present it in this form. This is gold ore from a copper gold mine called Golden Grove, and so it's usually in this form. And it's the drill core when it comes out is quite narrow, because they've got to drill quite deep and then they've got to get it up in a thing that intact so they can map it. But the thicker this core is, the more tests we can run on. And to do what's called metallurgical tests, we need this is NQ core, so it's only like 44 millimeters in diameter. PQ core is all the way at 85 millimeters, and so this is and this from De Beers. Well, you can sort of see the curve it is. The wider the core, the more expensive it is. Diamond ore this size, yes, it's just an expensive piece of rock. And my girlfriend at the time got very angry that this should be smelted down for jewelry. But yeah, well. So anyway, where was I going with that? Yeah, so what I was trying to do at the time was present rock texture. So you can actually see a three-dimensional shape. So you can see the rock when you map it on 6 sides with them in terms of mineralogy. So we'd polish it, we'd image it, we'd put an XRF across it and XRD if we can, like we'd scalp a bit off, and then we'd break it. So a lot of stuff got made for my collection that never actually quite made it to the breakage end of things. So I've got lots and lots and lots of drill cores. They're all over the house, and my wife's a very patient woman.
That's always good.
Yeah. So there's lots of stuff to show, but that's I've got after that was more of the same. Like there's hundreds of examples all over the place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yes. So I've got like iron ore, coal. I've got copper. I've got nickel. I've got lead. I've got silver. All right, here we go. What I prepared earlier. Yeah, this is silver ore.
Oh, wow.
Century zinc, lead silver. So it's lead silver zinc, but this is actually in the lead silver section. So what they would do is they would get the ore and they would in fact, where is it? That's the zinc component, and so you'd have like one part geologically would have that, and the other part would have this. We'd blow it up, and these two would be mixed, and so you'd have a process plant that would then process and extract the zinc out, and then the ore would flow on to the next circuit, which would extract the silver and lead. And the silver and lead was sold as a concentrate together. The zinc was separate. But yeah, and so what I've tried to do is polish it, and then I've actually put a lacquer on it, so it actually rock. When you actually look at it, most ore when you see it's just grey. You think what the thing about it, but you've got to break it open and then wet it before you can actually see stuff. And the reason geologists lick things is we're testing grain size.
Oh, okay.
The grain size of the particles will tell us, if it's a sediment, it tells you what is it. The difference between a clay, a siltstone, a sandstone, or a clay stone is the grain size involved. And your teeth are actually very, very good way of actually sort of justifying that. And yes, rocks taste terrible, especially rocks with sulfides in them.
Oh, wow.
Simon, you're my rock star. I've had people ask me, how does the USGS know that the United States will be out of bitumen in 2032? That's because guys like Simon have drilled all over the country these core samples. That's the truth. That's how they know. It's like, how do they know that? Because these guys drill core samples all over the country. They've already mapped out the country like back in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah. In fact, in GTK, this geological survey I work for, they had a whole lot of historical maps that they got rid of. And when they digitized everything, they didn't want all the old stuff. And so I liberated, for personal use, 2 cubic meters of antique geological maps. And there was a great big pile from the USGS. And you had these big booklets, like A2 size booklets of geological reports from the USGS from 1902 and 1896.
Wow.
I give them away as gifts. But, you want one?
I see Ivor has a question.
Yeah, Ivor, yes, hit me.
You got to unmute first, Ivor.
Okay, I've been reading about the Copper Kings in Butte, Montana, and, up in the Lake Superior, all that area. And I was wondering, back then, they basically dug into the hill of Butte and found pretty good ore, pretty good pure stuff. And that turned into all the electric lines.
40%.
Yeah,
at
40%.
the peak.
So that became kind of flowed out into all our lines and stuff. But how do you see copper doing? I know copper they call it Dr. Copper sometimes. And it tells how the economy is going to do, whether or not it's up or down.
That's correct. Copper's like, they call it like your day-to-day, it's a proxy for industrialization. Let me start again. Steel and concrete are a proxy for large-scale industrialization, like over the decades. But copper is considered day-to-day demand supporting in technology, where gold is highly geopolitical. There's the mistaken belief that copper, no one gives a shit about copper, but we need it. Therefore, it's a reliable proxy. Now, when they first settled North America, industrial sites were just not there in the way we knew. It was a pristine environment. And in a lot of the streams, you had massive boulders of copper. Like there's a picture of a couple of guys sitting on a boulder of copper. So they were all taken away first. And slowly they all got cleaned out. And there's a few articles that are available where people thought the world was ending when they couldn't pan for copper out of streams anymore. They had to mine it out of the ground with grades of 15%. And they thought, the world is ending.
And when was this?
Oh, this was like in the 1880s. Back in the day. When North America was first settled in the early 1800s, the shit they found, we would be amazed. So now you got places like Bingham Canyon that's like 0.2%, and that's the economies of scale and energy. We'll take that. So copper, all our technology depends on that. There's lots of efforts to actually move away from that. Efforts to replace copper with aluminium have been successful in some cases. Like a lot of the power lines, for example, are steel with a coating of aluminium, or maybe a coating of copper in some circumstances to transmit the electricity. But a lot of electronics, like your computer or your phone, all the exotic stuff still depends on copper for its circuitry. Now, what might change that is graphene, if we can get around to making it without so much energy. And so, before I move on, so we're not running out of copper. There's lots of it around, but most of it's now really low grade. And so now we've got the problem of like what I like to say is the entire Andes mountain range is one giant copper deposit that is so low grade, and we're just mining out the high grade bits. But our ability to access that copper in a sensible fashion is the problem. And I think it's actually the case. What we're seeing in oil will actually go to all other materials. Questions,
Stan, and then Dan.
Yeah.
About the time you mentioned this, Simon, I was going to ask the question: what in that graphene, of course, carbon fiber and graphene they're obviously good conductors.
You dropped out. Could you say that again? I missed half that sentence.
About the time that you started your discussion, I immediately thought of carbon fiber as a conductor, and then you said graphene and carbon fiber.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had my hand up, but is it really as an industrial product? Do you think it's carbon fiber and graphene are going to make an impact on like the value of copper and the use of copper in the industry?
It depends who you talk to, right? Like back in the 70s, for example, we didn't really have an aluminium industry. Like aluminium was available, but we didn't sort of have it in such large quantities we do now. And BHP went out and saw the value in it, created the industrial value chain first, then brought aluminium online, and then did the marketing of the final product, and thus, which is why they're the largest mining company now. We could do the same thing with titanium. We know it's there. We've got so much titanium, we're putting it in paint, right? But we don't see it in manufacture the same way we see it in, say, aluminium or steel. I think graphene's the same thing. Now, it's not understood. The material properties are very good. But how to actually make that graphene? Getting graphene to be pure enough to be useful, these are hurdles to jump over. The people who support graphene says we can do this, it can be sorted out. But then you talk to the realists, says, yeah, the logistical issues of things are going to be a problem. What I think might happen is if we can get cheap energy in the form of, say, thorium molten salt, which at the moment they're flagging it at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, where the real cost of that energy would be a fraction of that. But if they can do that at 2 cents a kilowatt hour and they've got cheap energy, then graphene could become possible. Then what do we use it for? Like, do we actually sort of print up lots and lots and lots and lots of graphene, and then do we use it to make like coffee cups, or do we make it circuitry, or whatever? So there's a lot of unanswered moving parts in there. I think the simple answer is we will always need copper, and all attempts to bring in new materials online could change things, but copper is the bedrock everything sets on at the moment. And until I see something else to change that, I think society will just make do with less and less available copper and change its behavior accordingly, because it really is a rate determining step at the moment. We don't need rare earths. We can get away with it without them but we can't go without copper, just like we can't go without iron.
That's great. Thank you. I'll share one quick story if I can. There's a gentleman named Rogers that owns the rights to Tetris and has a nice farm out here in Hawaii. And one of our friends, Peter, and our friends, Paul Pontio, works with him. And I was invited to a little social thing, and I went to shake hands with Hank Rogers, and he kind of pulled his hand back, and I go, "What's up?" He goes, "I burned my hand." And so we asked the question about how do you burn your hand? Well, it turns out he was visiting, I think, Bhutan, and wanted to give the one of the leaders there one of these big sails that had lighting on it and stuff. But the pole is made out of carbon fiber. And as they were trying to erect this pole in the guy's yard, they hit a power line and burned the hands on the two guys.
Whoops.
Holding in, and that's where the exit point for all this electricity. So that was my first experience with how good of a conductor is carbon fiber was through Hank Rogers.
It's very good. How good compared to other materials? I've yet to see a proper comparison. Would it replace copper? Like gold is a better conductor than copper. Aluminium
silver.
Aluminium is a good conductor, but it has ductile properties that are different. Like you can't bend aluminium into shapes that you can with copper, which means it's not suitable for circuitry. What are the limitations of graphene? I actually don't know, because every time I try and talk to, they immediately start talking back to me in Klingon. Yeah, like. Graphene needs to be brought into the real world before I'll believe it. Until then, I'll say, isn't that interesting?
Fair enough. Okay, Dan had his hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Dan.
So everybody's mistaken me. I'm not an oil and gas guy. I'm actually a utility guy. So, but anyway, you were talking about like high tension power lines. So here in the United States, we use 660 or 665 aluminum alloy for the high tension power lines. There's no steel in it. And the reason why we use it is because that's a type of aluminum you can pass current through it, but it doesn't generate a magnetic field. There's no magnetic field. There's no impedance to the flow.
Yep.
I hear people talking about using superconductors in the transmission system, and like, okay, you know nothing about this because superconductors produce magnetic fields and it impedes the flow of the current. The other is we have aluminum alloys we use in substation transformers. So the past 30 years, we've been using aluminum for the windings and three-phase substation transformers, the big $20 million transformers. I myself, I like using a lot of 775 for a lot of different reasons, but the biggest reason has to be because that alloy has a tensile strength greater than titanium. So what I'm trying to say is we're using a lot more aluminum as a substitute for copper and a lot of things. I'm still waiting to see them start using aluminum like in generators and things like that. The only difference is that aluminum has a different thermal coefficient, so it expands and contracts very differently from copper. You can really do really tight windings with copper, like small motors and things like that. But the big megawatt generators, there's no wires in there. In generators, actually bars of metal that we use to make the generators out of. And probably in the next 10 years, we'll start making generators with those aluminum alloys in the generators and not use copper. So I'm just trying to tell you, we're coming up with other substitutes rather than just using copper.
So human innovation's a thing. This is why all the stuff that we do, none of it's static, none of it, right?
Yeah.
And so when we make predictions for the future, well, so this is where we are now. These are the challenges we have now. What might come later? I think we're on the cusp of a flurry of innovation. Once we understand systems thinking coupled with engineering innovation,
right,
and money can get the fuck out of the way. Incidentally, what I think I'll show you, this is a GTK used to hand these out as like trophies and awards. And so anyway, I didn't get this award because I found it in the stuff they were going to toss out because I liked how they carved it up. Anyway, my daughter repurposed it, my daughter Rani, where I stubbed my toe and I got through that without saying a 4-letter word. So I got an award to Simon for not swearing in pain.
I was trying to say, Simon, there's just good news out there. And like I said, it's not new. We've been doing it for a while. Last 30 years.
Right. So back to serious concepts. I have actually been chasing solutions for some time now. What I found when I first started down this path, like years ago, everyone was in delusional. They were either full on delusional, or they wanted to hear that we're doomed and we should worship the volcano, and there was nothing in between. And I says, look, well, what about da 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 da? And I found myself offending multiple tribes at the same time, and it occurred to me that we actually to actually get anywhere here, I need to go out there and get a new solution, put the numbers and the engineering together to it, and then put it in a form that these monkeys can actually understand, present it to other people, politicians, for example, and then those monkeys who were usually flaming me could see it from a distance. Then we could have a conversation. It's been a very strange journey. Now, I've actually put together a series of technologies that are decades old, but we consider them unconventional. And there's 5 or 6 of them, right? And this is, to me, is can help us move the needle going forward. There are indeed solutions, right? The problem is how we are determined to do things at the moment is the problem. I do think we're moving into a low energy world, even though some of these solutions are good and are useful. We don't have the time to scale them up, and some of them may not be able to be scaled up anyway. So we're moving into the wild, wild west of reason, consequence, and accountability.
Right. Well, I wanted to inject a YouTube question, but I see Charlie has his hand up. I'll let Charlie go first.
Yeah, give to Charlie.
Okay, go ahead, Charlie. Charlie, you're muted. Charlie, you have to unmute first.
To all you technical cornucopians that are blathering away here, as an ecologist, I would like to say that the problem is not just how you make stuff, but what happens at the other end of the wires. I used to say to my students, the only thing worse than running out of oil is not running out of oil. If we continue the human endeavor, do we want to continue the human industrial endeavor, even at low impact of power generation, indefinitely into the future? And I think we have no choice in the matter. It's going to happen or it's not going to happen. But so there's something about all of this that's making me a little bit uncomfortable, that we're just going to keep the whole enterprise going on and expanding and blowing up. I mean, like a balloon blowing up, of human impact on the world indefinitely. And I just worry about that some. Let's just leave it there.
Go, Charlie. So, right now, I actually agree with that. Now, but my solution is both technological, it's social, and it's ecological. All of that is together. And my views for the future, what I call the purple transition, is actually a combination of all of those things. And it's not a question of us doing things by choice. We will be put in a position where I think we will be forced to do it. How do we engineer our way around those systems, like within those boundaries? The first system I think we're going to see crash is money, because our money is based on bullshit, and bullshit's being called. Therefore, anything industrial is about to lock up and fall over. So, but all the ecological stuff, ocean acidification, I think is probably the most serious. Species die-off, land degradation, that is actually part of what I think we should be applying our thinking to. And the answer to that is our system has got to contract in size and withdraw from parts of the natural environment. That is how I see it. But how do we do that? And these are the technologies I'm putting forward. Anyway, Dave, hit me. Dan.
Well, all I'm saying, Simon, I agree with you about, because I talked about pretty much financing, actually where the rubber meets the road is going to be the biggest issue going forward. Like that Alaska thing, $25 million well, minimum 9 wells, $225 million. What's the break even on that oil if it's ever going to be brought to market? But the other thing is, when my second presentation I give next month, where Stan and I are going to show you all the different solutions that have come out of the labs, what we're actually planning and so forth. The one piece we haven't figured out is how to replace that globalized economic system. And because understand, the number one commodity shipped around the planet is actually crude oil. When you look at it by ton, by quantity, et cetera, is actually crude oil. And what we started happening with that IMO fuel standard is that system started breaking down, that globalized system. So you end up, the economic system ends up shrinking. And that's what that IMO situation that I talked about in the presentation, that's a symptom of the future of how this is playing out. So yeah, Simon's exactly on target.
Right. So I see us on the cusp of a change in society that happens every couple of centuries. This is one of my fabulous books, but this is one that what we're calling the conventional neoclassical economic model is breaking down. The guy I like to present for this is Steve Keen. He's actually quite good. Okay, so a couple of centuries ago, most of the time we were fighting over, there's a good model about what do we fight over, right? And that tells us where we're at. 5-6 centuries ago, we were fighting over which was the best religious code, right? Now, once we stopped doing that, it got to a certain point where what we call science manifested merged with philosophy and changed the world, and that became the Age of Reason. A few centuries later, what we call engineering manifested, merged with money, and changed the world. And at that point, what we call neoclassical economics appeared. Now, neoclassical economics was based around the idea that the value of something is not based on what it took to make it, but its perceived value. So if I can convince you this is worth 100 times what I took to make it, then that's its true value if you're prepared to pay it. It's an economic system based on bullshit. Bullshit becomes valuable. Right. So now here we are, a couple of centuries later, and the principles behind neoclassical economics are now starting to break down. We've got things like, well, then there's ecological issues, and there's global boundary conditions that we're now sort of buttressing up against, and the social justice issues that in the beginning neoclassical economics really didn't care about, but now we do. So what I think is now happening is we're on another cusp, and neoclassical economics is about to be wiped out, and in its place, some form of ecological economics will be forced to be brought in. And the words, I think, to describe this, and this is like the historians centuries from now looking back, use something like, what's it? Genuine situation awareness merges with the ability to determine what's real and what's not, and then changes the world. And I think we're going through that now. So when we get down to brass tacks to what do we do and how do we do it, it comes to why do we do it, and things that move on. And so we're moving into the era of reason, consequence, and accountability. All right. Yeah, sorry. Andy?
Okay, I'd like to say something. Please don't go to ecological economics, because all they fucking do is put a dollar value on nature's services and turn the same old neoclassical crank. There's a much better alternative. It's called biophysical economics. Here it is backwards. Energy and the Wealth of Nations. I'll send a copy to everybody, and it's actually sold 1.5 million copies.
Oh, I'll go once.
So it's biophysical economics. I just like to promote that as opposed to now ecological economics is great. Don't get me wrong, but even Herman Daly, its initiator, got tired of what they were doing because everybody still has an economist mindset. This book is written by an economist and an ecologist from a completely different and very, very energy-centered perspective. Anybody interested in that?
I'm just ordering it on Amazon now. Huzzah!
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
He's just ordered. Go ahead.
I'm just ordering it off Amazon as you speak.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and
while you're getting that, you can get energy return on investment. It's much cheaper. Energy return on investment, and that's all I have in my lifetime. That's all I have to say. Except that I'm a damn good fly fisherman, or I used to be.
Okay. Well, when there's a moment, I have a little update to the presentation that I think is relevant to our current discussion. But Dusty, go ahead for now.
My question is sort of like to Charlie, and when people speak of ecological, how do you balance or filter through the world of, let's just say, politics? I can't say the word right now. When it turns into politics, when there's kind of, let's just say, a lot of cloud and a lot of confusion between, something that people perceive as happening in the environment or factual, or it's hard to explain what I'm trying to say. But
pay no attention. I don't find anybody in the world, maybe just a little bit today. I found Dan was on my wavelength. I'm, as an ecologist, going back to my original work in aquatic ecosystems, I'm not interested in environmental quality so much as I'm in resource availability to plants and to fish. And, that's what I did as an ecologist. And I find almost no ecologists except my close colleague, John Day, who thinks that way. I was trained by Howard Odom. It's a completely different ecology from what happens in most of the world. And I went and I was a young professor at Cornell University, and I was in an ecology department, and I might as well have been on Mars. It was just a completely different perspective of ecology and ecologists. And I take that perception of looking at ecosystems that I learned from Howard Odom, and I take it and look at economic systems, and to me, it's the same.
I guess I thought of a better way to ask my question is, how do we find a balance between some camps that have almost a make no zero impact, get rid of humans mentality, versus a mentality that's, take whatever, do whatever? How do we find a balance between those two? It seems like there's
I don't think we do, and all I can say is nature bats last. I think that I can't predict what's going to happen, and I think it's happening piecemeal around the world everywhere you look. And I thought we'd be running out of oil by now, and that'd take care of it. But we're not, or may not be, or maybe we will be pretty soon. But I don't think it's certainly not happening voluntarily. As far as I can tell, every single politician in the world is running on a platform of more. So how do we do anything? Well, we don't.
So Dusty, what you're talking about is, and I tried combating some of this in my presentation. In the military, we call it signal, not noise. Or another way of thinking about it is understand there are people out there that have a narrative, and a lot of the facts don't fit their narratives. Like when I talked about, for example, they've got this narrative out there, and they talk about they don't have enough natural gas pipeline out of the Permian, so they can't produce all this oil and bring it to market. When I've just showed you they got plenty of pipeline. So what's the truth? Well, the truth is there's a frack water problem. There's all this waste. It's called associated water. When they bust up the shale, they get all this extra water out of the ground, and they have to go and inject it into a waste well or whatever to get rid of it. That's the limitation. But they don't want to tell the public that because it doesn't fit this political picture of the reality. So what I'm trying to tell you is don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. In the military, we don't listen to what you say. Talk is cheap. We watch what you do. We base our decisions on facts.
And I say you look at the energy cost of everything you're talking about. What's the energy cost of getting rid of that water? What's the energy cost of drilling 9 wells in
I have an idea. Right now, it's topped our production out at about between 3.2 to 3.8 million barrels a day. But it also goes back to the financing. Will the bankers be willing to finance it? The people that control this equation are the bankers. And if we have a major financial crisis, that all gets shut down.
Well, and from my perspective, you look at a dollar bill and it should say, pay to the bearer 5 megajoules of energy services.
I agree with you, but we disconnected the dollar from anything tangible back in 1971. Right. And for example, there's this thing called BRICS. What that is, where the world is de-dollarizing, and they've actually standardized in the gold standard. There's a reason why that's happened, because we weaponized the currency, and there's a lot of other things that happened in the past that doesn't agree with a lot of these countries and backing away from the dollar. That's really what's going on.
But you look at when the Spaniards brought gold back from the New World to the Old World. They doubled its quantity and halved its value, because gold by itself is not valuable. It's just like running the printing press.
At that time, you're actually right, but that's not true today. For example, Elon Musk couldn't turn his fortune into gold because there's not enough gold on the planet to turn it into the billions that he has.
Mm-hmm. So
more oil.
I just wanted to go over this presentation. I did it last time, so I'm just going to go over it briefly, but I added a few slides. And so this is the Jean-Laurent Harare graph. And now we're not 100% sure of the timeline of when the oh, Stan, you wanted to say something?
I just want to comment that there was a phrase that Simon mentioned that I think encapsulates this whole discussion. It's called situational awareness. And Dan will agree that in the military, situational awareness is like 90% of your job. It's to figure out what's the real impact, what's really happening around you. And it seems like there's just a lot of confusion about what's having real impacts because of breakdowns in communication and thing. And that's why Dan says, you got to see it, you got to understand it, and then it's going to make an impact. So that situational awareness comment by Simon is critical.
Thank you.
That's going to kick our ass.
Yeah.
And
So
Andrii, I'd just like to point out that I'm of that published account that you're showing a graph of. I'm an author of that with Jean and.
oh, okay. Well, thank you. That's great. So we have one of the experts here, and so well, we're not 100% sure that these projections are completely
Yeah, Andrew. I
accurate.
mean, I've just given you that whole CO2 thing where they're using supercritical CO2
Yeah,
as a solvent
exactly.
to get more
So-
hydrocarbons out of the ground. So that really blows this out of the water.
So, well, yeah.
Unfortunately.
So this might be pushed back, 10 or 5 or 10 years. We don't know exactly, but so these projections, in terms of the years that I'm putting it, you can just consider it to be kind of pushed forward into the future. But just going based on that graph, eventually we will get to a decline curve because all resources have a decline eventually.
Well, it's just like what you said, Andrew, like the CO2 system. The farmers are fighting back from it. It'll cost them $5 trillion to build it. What are the odds of them doing this, especially in this economic climate in the United
And how
States?
much would
having
they
the
get?
debt we have? Yeah, the odds are it's not going to get built. I mean, the farmers are fighting it tooth and nail.
Right, exactly. And so we don't know if that carbon stuff will be able to push it back any further.
Yeah.
So I'm going by Jean's and Charlie's graph just because it seems to be the most moderate. Like if we go just on discoveries, it would be much more truncated. So Jean added a bunch of things in here, and I think these are fairly reasonable estimates that he has.
Well, yeah, and even when you look at that thing that came out of ExxonMobil, that's what Exxon's telling you, and it has to do. That's an investment story, because the costs are going up to bring it to market. When does it become uneconomical to keep doing this? That's what Exxon's trying to tell all of us. That's what the Saudis were trying to tell all of us. Right, that the costs are going up.
Yeah,
and we're getting less. That's what it says. It's really what it
right.
means.
And then we know from historical examples that certain oil prices or percentage decline of production leads to certain effects on the food price and the oil price and things like that. And so I just made, these are rough projections based on those numbers. Though I did find that the food prices have been going up, even though there's unaccounted for percentages, so I had to add in these kind of unaccounted base growth percentages in order to get the numbers, and so this is kind of where we were, and so it was about median household spends 28% of income on food, and now where the area where we were going into 2025 to 2030 will probably reach plateau, at least based on the trajectory that we're currently going on, and median household spending within 35%. So I was saying how, it's good to have social cohesion. Now, when I presented this to this city or the county planner, actually, he wanted to see because I was giving a fairly optimistic view, and he wanted to see what would the business as usual be. And so the business as usual based on, historical precedent, that we might be entering financial collapse, and we're starting to see as at the end, probably closer to the end of the 2025 to 2030 range, though we're starting to see some of that in terms of the stock market collapsing, but that's probably a lot to do with the uncertainty with Trump's tariffs and things. But yeah, so this is also based on Dmitry Orlov's 5 stages of collapse here. And so wages drop or stagnate, and then food prices double or triple. So percentage of income on food, 30 to 50%. And actually in Canada, depending on which numbers you're looking at, we're actually already in this range, though it may drop because the carbon tax was lifted, but we'll see. But this is for the anyhow, so it's not too bad. Now 2030 to 2035, in the best case scenario, this will be like where we're doing rail. And then here is just showing that a truck compatible road and a rail compatible county road are actually quite similar, by simply having it at like the biggest difference is the grade. So if you have like a lower grade when you're rebuilding roads, then you can make them rail compatible, and then it'll be easier to convert them to rail later. And the business as usual scenario would be commercial collapse, and this is in the 2030 to 2035 range. And so this is where the supply chains break and stores empties out, and you have black markets. And now this is an interesting feature that I noticed, is that actually jobs become scarce if your supply chains break down, and so people are actually making less money, and that pushes up how much of their income they're spending on food, and this increases revolutionary potential because hunger drives action, like the Mexican revolutionary hacienda raids were during that time. And 2035 to 2040, these are the revolutionary years. These are, by all the projections, like this is assuming that decline starts within the 2030 to 2035 range, right? So then we'll be on track for this. And so this is median household spending 70% on food. And so,
Andrew, I was going to, there's one thing you can add to your list there, and it's actually probably the best indicator of all, is watch the number of refineries. Refineries start blanking out. Now, Stan, you guys there in Hawaii, you guys used to have 2 refineries. Now you're down to 1.
Correct.
And I know there in Australia, you guys are down to 1 refinery. You used to have like 4 of them. And that's what happens as it starts collapsing. That's a first symptom. You start losing the ability, turning that crude oil into a refined product. And so that's the indicator how fast it's collapsing, is what I'm trying to tell you. That's the trigger point.
Yeah. So I guess we're already seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so these are just examples. So historical examples. Basically, when you're 70%, you're definitely in revolutionary territory. Lots of revolutions. These are some of the previous examples. The Romanov family and all that. So that's the political collapse section. And so this is where the government fails. This is for the business as usual scenario. And then so this is kind of full sustenance incomes far exceed, and this is but yeah, actually at this point, if they're spending like 100% on food, then the revolutionary potential starts to wane because they're just too exhausted to do that. And but on the good scenario, we would aim for 25% of people living on village homesteads. So I'm just saying that there's a good scenario. We don't have to go the revolutionary route, but that would require, land distribution. I know Simon did projections, and so they agree that it's quite possible to do a rural transition. Okay. And so now in the 2040 to 2045 range, if everything goes optimally, the fuel price will be $10 to $20 a liter, and so that at that point we can do Fischer-Tropsch gasoline at competitive rates, closed cycle, from short rotation coppice willow. But the business as usual crowd will be in what's called social collapse. And but at this point, the revolutionary potential is none. So so our pockets of survivability, which will be doing these things, will no longer have to worry about raids or things from the other people, and instead they'll be focusing on methane digesters and all of these nice things. And 2045 to 2050, it'll basically be a rural paradise for the people that are still around. And 75% plus in homestead villages, and whereas for the business as usual, well, they'll be dead basically. And so these will be the people that are around, and this is kind of an example of land distribution. Okay, I see there were several questions. Dusty, and then Charlie. Go ahead, Dusty.
Yeah, Dan, this is kind of a question maybe for your next slide next month. But how I see a lot of confusion between economics and reality, and that seems to be a big problem, because with economics, although it's a great way to be able to tell what's going on, there also is a lot of correlation or causation question, right? Because you have things like the Fed or the BRICS. It's so complicated, and there's a lot of interference. Let's say, it's not just pure capitalism in the sense of like value of one thing versus amount. You have a lot of fingers on the dials, so to speak, of reality when it comes to economics. So with things like EROI, or like you mentioned, like the refinery shutting down, what's a good way, or maybe you're going to go into that next time, of making sense of finding out where those dials are being messed with, or if it's just actual reality.
So you're dealing with that thing about perception, and other people have these narratives. I mean, for example, right now in here in America, we get this Trump thing going on, but he's focused on some of the things that Andrew had in his presentation. We've had stagnating wages here in the United States. We've deindustrialized and basically used that globalized system to bring prices down for products and so forth. But understand that globalized system, the dollar being the reserve currency, is not a benefit to the American people. It's a benefit to the world. It's a benefit to the Wall Streeters and guys in DC, but there's not a benefit to 90% of the American public. And that goes back to something called Strippin's dilemma. But you're all going back to, we all have these different opinions of how we view things. I mean, the oil and gas guys, they have their own opinion how things work. The bankers have their own opinion how things work. The banker guys, they have their own opinion about how things work. Everything's dollars and economics, and they never take into account the realities of the supply of like a commodity like oil or whatever. Right. So they all have these different views of how they see the world and these different narratives. Right. But the reason why I focused on, what are the inputs to the system? That's what I focus on, because the inputs dictate the outputs. And understand, I'm in that business where I focus on the inputs and here are the outputs. Okay. Because my job is making sure all of you have electricity in your homes, and that never gets interrupted, and the infrastructure doesn't change. The next presentation I provide, because I understand everybody has their own opinion what's actually going on, right? But in the next presentation I gave, what I'm going to talk about, here's all the things we've come up to ameliorate this, right? Now understand, it goes a lot in line with what Simon's talking about. There's another guy out there called Nate Hagens and the Great Simplification. But understand, these are just taking the things, how the military, how we look at things and how we organize things. And here are all the substitutes for our modern civilization and restructure things. Right now, the world is going to go through this process where we're going to tear apart this globalized system, this globalized trade system, and things will become local. And every time you have change, things get painful. I've had people out there talk about like Trump putting tariffs on products and stuff, and somehow that's going to be inflationary. And the answer is it's the exact opposite. It's deflationary. When you raise prices on those products, they become expensive. People don't buy them. That's actually deflationary. The downside here is you have central banks that try to counteract deflation and debt destruction. They counteract it by essentially printing money or loaning money into existence. They counteract it, and you get a stagflation situation. So as the system breaks down, you'll see more deflation, more debt destruction. There's a big danger out here outside the United States, and there's a system out there called the Eurodollar system, and it's in collateralized debt obligations, collateralized loan obligations, and there's quadrillions of dollars in that system that are based on key pieces of debt. So as the system shrinks, that is more at risk of collapsing. And understand, all the international shipping, the cargo container ships, the oil tankers, all that's built on that financing. If that collapses, then the shipping breaks down and doesn't happen. So how would it affect everybody differently? It'll affect the Americans. It'll affect the people in Australia, Europe. It'll affect everybody, because we're all very dependent on this globalized system that's actually shrinking right now. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Charlie, you have your hand up? And so I wanted to add a little bit, Dan, that while it's definitely true that in the West, the common practice in Keynesian economics is to avoid deflation by printing money, and that's why we had the quantitative easing and all of those things.
Exactly.
But China actually is the first in a long time to allow deflation, and so actually prices in China have gone lower because they haven't done the money printing, and it's actually made food more affordable to
That's
the poor.
true, and they're going through economic problems in China, and we're all going to see how this plays out. But in the background, like I said, the first symptom was that IMO fuel standard, and it changed the fuel and changed the transportation system of the planet, and that system's shrinking, and we'll see how this all plays out. Can I predict it? No, it's going to be a very chaotic thing.
Okay.
I just know it's going to.
Dan, I run a journal. You want to write a paper for my journal? Well, I'd make that offer anyway. And have you read Joe Tainer?
No, I have not.
Well, Tainer'd be great here. I just want to say, and Andrii, with your presentation, to me, it's very simple. EROI of all fuels except early fracking, EROI of all fuels is going down, which means inevitably oil has to get more expensive, which means inevitably everything has to get more expensive because everything's made from oil. And what that results in is inflation, and people blame inflation on their leaders. So that makes every country in the world ever harder to lead, for the political systems to work. And there we are. And I have to leave because they've come in here now to clean my rugs.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for joining.
Energy, I am
yes.
sure.
All right.
Okay. Well, good group to talk with. And
okay. I have a few questions from YouTube if Dan and Stan are still here. Okay. So how is the Trump's global trade war going to affect the peak oil? Does anyone have a answer to that one? Simon, it looks like you're talking, but I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Oh, but oil production is flat since Trump came in. I don't know what else it means.
Okay.
So what I think is in many respects, Trump's a symptom, right? As was, if peak oil really was November 2018, and the system's been supplemented from other sources, biofuels, natural gas, what have you. It means from this point on, things are going to get more and more difficult, and there's going to be a major reshuffling. One of the things that I'm seeing as a policy for some years now is the idea of free trade, and the idea that everyone's got access to all markets on the planet is horseshit, right? And it's been horseshit for a while. Now, Trump doing the Orange Hamburglar Act that he's actually sort of doing will serve, I think, to encourage all power blocks around the world to close their borders and try and decentralize and try and do things locally. At the moment, it's a knee-jerk reaction. Like they're responding without thinking. The path we're going down will be painful. Is it the best path? I don't know, but humans do dumb shit in an organized fashion. So what I think we are seeing is the United States will be producing oil, but they'll probably keep that oil just for the United States domestic use and stop trying to dominate the international market. I think that's where this is going. How much oil is there? I don't know. Guys like Dan and Stan will be able to answer questions like that. But I do see a major shift because all the policies, all the studies we've been seeing for years, they're all global. And they're with the assumption that there's one price, one market, and we all access it. Those days are gone. And that's what I think the Trump wrecking ball has kicked off. And now we've got the unplanned consequences hurricane that's about to rip through us all.
Yeah, Simon, you're absolutely right. That whole thing with the LNG terminals about the bankers not willing to build any more LNG terminals here in the United States, that's the first salvo, because they're not willing to do it because they see the natural gas being preserved for the United States and not being exported. That's why they're not willing to invest in any more LNG export terminals. So that's the first symptom that you're talking about there. You're on target.
Yeah. So like the Biden administration was told Build Back Better, and Trump administration was told Make America Great Again, it's actually the same outcome, where they withdraw all actions back behind domestic borders and they reestablish their own industrial capability. Like I'm talking to a few people about rare earth development in the United States. So the United States industrially is actually trying to get in there and do stuff, whereas Europe is literally talking in circles and can't agree on the color of an orange. So the fate of Europe long term is pretty clear. So as for the United States seems to be going through a metamorphosis that I suppose would be called painful, but a metamorphosis is clearly needed. Whether it's the right metamorphosis or whether this is a sensible way to do it, well, yeah. Anyway, that's how I see this going.
One of the things I think that we may be seeing the initial stages of some kind of collapse is like the whole where the rebellious urban youth are spending most of their time protesting and burning Tesla's cars and things like that. And I know Mao had a solution, which was sending them to the rural areas to do farming and things like that. I don't know if Elon and Trump would consider that. I'm not an American, so I don't know if Dan has any comments on that. No. Okay. There's another YouTube question from Respectogram. He says, I listen to O&G earnings calls, and many of them are making large contracts with data centers and hypercenters for AI, which is their attempt at chasing demand. What if they know supply is constrained?
Well, the odds are they're not going to build data centers attached to a power grid. That's what I was telling you about the Braess paradox. That's why they went from power grid to try to do nuclear power or try to do gas turbine. They're flapping around the wind, and it goes back to there's a complexity problem with the power grid in the United States.
Mm-hmm. I heard they're putting their AI or Bitcoin miners right next to the power plant, so they don't have to go through the
in
grid.
Texas, they're building right next to the LNG pipeline system there in Texas, and they're using gas turbines to feed the data centers.
Okay. And a question from Kevin Marr. Could we end up in a position where the government taking over key pieces of the chain like refining is necessary to extend the life of the system, non-economic operation to maintain the system?
Well, as a good example, whenever governments take over refineries, they usually collapse. Look what happened down in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. They had to bring Chevron back in just to bring their oil production back up and their production of diesel and gasoline. Trump basically canceled Chevron's license, so they're out of Venezuela again. What's going to happen? Their production is going to fall.
Mm-hmm. And one last question. Is there any hope for where I am in Ireland? Grid is totally dependent on imported gas. Nuclear is banned. We have no hydro. Politicians consider anything except offshore wind. Won't consider anything offshore.
Politics in England is very difficult.
It's Ireland, but yeah, okay.
England, Ireland, I'm sorry, I apologize, but it's
all good.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Just like Simon talking about the Europeans, they can't agree on the color of an orange.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Yes. And did anyone have any comments or on my presentations or suggestions for improvements or anything?
Needs more cowbell.
Cowbell?
One of the things, a comment I want to make about the United States is truly 50 different countries, and we have 50 governors, and they have their own state government. And a lot of energy policy is actually decided at that level, not at the Washington, D.C. level. That's why when Trump says he wants to do stuff, but it doesn't actually happen, is because there's actually 50 other people that are in agreement with what he wants to do. So you have to remember about the United States, it's actually 50 different countries that join together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. And so next time you guys will be doing a presentation on the future and potential alternatives.
Well, the solutions, and it'll actually dovetail into what Simon's talking about.
Yeah.
Here are solutions to all these pieces.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking it would be good for Simon to do kind of a conjoining presentation, because I know he often presents about how it's difficult to extract the minerals, and I don't know if that's
right. I don't know. I'm going to talk about here's all the things that we invented that actually exist and came out of the labs, and here's how we plan to basically, or at least organize it for the United States. But you could adapt a lot of this to what's going on in Australia and some other places like that. So it'd be good information for everybody.
Happy to present whenever.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon.
The Hawaii work will come out eventually, and when it does, and it's passed all the checks and everything like that, I can present it here with everyone else who's in. Like Stan, do you want to take the stage in this one?
Actually, Dan and I are going to do the next one, and I think that's a perfect lead into what Simon's going to probably
I think so
talk
too.
about.
Yep.
Simon says it's an excellent game.
Great.
Yeah,
So
you're going to find out a lot of minds here think a lot alike and how they're approaching a lot of this. Of course, I'm cheating because I've known Peter for a long time. So
you just got to make sure the rock police don't come and nab Simon before he gets a chance to do his presentation.
That's true. That is so true.
The fashion police and the fun police have been after me for decades. So far, I've outmaneuvered them.
That's great. So I got another YouTube question. Could it be we doomer preppers were right that the best wealth is a remote homestead off-grid with metal roof, cisterns, and guns?
I'd be careful with that. Be very, very, very careful with that.
I'm going to tell you the economy is going to simplify, and it's going to go down to that local level. Remember, that globalized system is breaking down, and so it'll go back to that local atomic level.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. But look at what happened in Argentina in 2001, where they had a number of case histories where was it better to be in a city or was it better to be in a remote location?
Absolutely truth. And that all goes back to human decision and what we do.
And the remote locations were eventually hit, every single one of them.
Yeah.
They were hit. Could you elaborate?
So there was a blog that was posted, I suppose, 10, 15 years ago, that someone explored their what happened. And yes, cities went. There is no good place that's perfect. Like there is luck of the draw, and humans do human things. And so it's a case of how do you actually make do with what you have, and what actions can you take to stack the odds in your favor, and can you behave flexibly? So what happened in Argentina, as I understand it, is it started out as an economic crisis, but they had all the hyperinflation and everything like that. But a lot of government services checked out. Like a lot of it just stopped. They had food shortages. They had riots. They had all that. Yes, things got difficult in cities, but the idea that if you happen to have a homestead out in the middle of nowhere with your guns and all the rest of it, every single one of those locations were found eventually, and they were targeted, but it happened later in the piece. It happened later when they thought everything was sort of stable and everything's fine. And what ended up happening was a gang would turn up. What they did was they got the information of where these locations were. I think based on building contractors, the registrar of building contractors, the information that they had. They were able to track that certain kinds of construction were happening, and that was like a flag for homestead that probably had stuff. And so they went out and visited them, and there was a scouting run, and eventually there was a target. And some of those targetings did involve violence, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I'm sort of saying is the true defense is to be part of a community. And the wealth of that community is in the skill base of that community. That's the true wealth.
And I would think a military background adds to that skill base that's pretty valuable in that scenario.
So I used to be in Mount Tamborina in Australia, and we were talking Transition Town, and the military skill base of like there was at the base of Mount Tamborine, there was an army base in a town called Canungra. And the idea was to go to that military base and offer, they could move all their families up onto the mountain. We'd feed them and they'd protect us. And the idea was army beats bikie gangs every day of the week. Now, the conclusion was it wasn't sensible to discuss strategies of what was needed on an open forum on the internet. It had to be face-to-face because, of course, the opposition was listening. So So yes, you're absolutely correct. But then when it actually comes time to actually sort of design stuff and action stuff, don't tell anyone.
In our presentation, just to give everybody a kind of a peek, we focus on towns and counties and these atomic units and how to structure them when we do the presentation. And understand, we're just talking about engineering. It's up to the people how they organize together and do things. But it goes back to that idea of having a community of shoemakers and seamsters and people that have unique skills inside of a community and building these small units that work together. If you think about how we build the military, we're built the same way. We started out a platoon, a company, a brigade, etc., division.
So in the chat, for shits and giggles, is a YouTube I released in 2013. I think it was my second one. And it's how to develop a self-sufficient community that is based around the idea of a small town. Take a small town, make it self-sufficient, and the idea was to have a blueprint of how to do things.
Yep.
There will be nothing in there about defense. That's the sort of stuff that is not discussed publicly, but obviously it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was reading some history books, and for most of history, city-states have been the main form of organization.
Yes, exactly.
And so it makes sense what you were saying about the towns.
Yeah, going all the way back to the Egyptians, the Greeks, etc. That's very true.
Yeah, so I was working on 50 to 100 families. Anyway, that YouTube's in the chat for those who are interested.
Yeah, yeah, and I've shared it on the YouTube so that people on YouTube can see it as well. Mm-hmm. And Ivor, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention there was this guy named Furfal. Well, his name is Fernando Furfal Aguirre, and he wrote a book called The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. And they have it on, it's on the internet and stuff. And it's really good. And I know from living in Guatemala in the early 80s that the safest place to be was in a kind of a village situation. All the places outside of the village, like Simon was saying, were kind of hit in a way by both the military and also the, the death squads, different groups. The only safe place to be was inside of this kind of, it was like they had people at every entrance and exit with guns. So then you could kind of be in this armed camp kind of.
Well, think back to right now. We're coming up on an important date, which is April 19th here in the United States. And that had to do with when we first took on the British, and that was between Lexington and Concord. And you had the Minutemen. And that's how all our towns, how the United States is put together, is either like a shire or a county or a parish, right? And those were independent units. And that's why the Minutemen back in 1775 were so effective, because that's how the country was organized. And so it was a good example when the British tried to take us on, we repelled them. And that's how it was done, because it was that Minuteman, that town, that county that was completely self-sufficient.
Yes. Yeah, I've been to the bridge at Concord, and it's very interesting because that was, there was a road right up from Lexington, and then you get to that bridge, and that's where they repelled them.
Yep.
And, so, I think it's going to take kind of, everybody thinks, okay, I'm going to have this self-sufficient homestead out in the middle of nowhere and things. And that could work, but I think a better idea is more of like a kind of a fortified hamlet or village type situation, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you.
We came to the conclusion that a network of small towns, like you have a network, and there was an alliance between those networks, and if there was trouble, they could get help. Not only could each town do something slightly different and then trade could happen, but if whatever happened, whether it's a security problem or a crop failure problem, help could be gotten from the rest of the network of towns. And we reckon like 4 or 5 towns was the maximum of the size, and each town would be a couple of thousand people maybe. And within the town, you had groups of, say, 50 to 100 families would form a group, and you had like several groups together.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a county.
Yeah.
Counties, states. That's why I was making a comment about the United States. It's not one country. It's actually 50 countries joined together, and each state's got hundreds of counties.
I know we have a new person joining us today, Moss Dome. I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself and if you had any questions. Do you know how to unmute? It's at the bottom. There you go. Oh, we still can't hear you. Unfortunately.
Now?
Okay. Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. The mic in front of the face helps. Yep. I've just been sort of eavesdropping. My name's Catherine Mossman, and this has all been very interesting. I live not far from where you are, Andrii. We've
Oh, okay.
talked before into the figure thing. Anyway,
Okay.
yeah, I'm very interested in all of this material, especially from an overpopulation perspective too. That's another thing that's sort of an elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. It's quite taboo yet. And you know, we all think that this is going to be solved by the you know, the end of oil, hopefully. But anyway, so I'm just curious, just listening in and getting a lot of receiving a lot of valuable information from you all, stuff that I didn't know about the oil and the gas. Thank you, Dan. Very good presentation, and also your cohort there. Look forward to hearing Stan.
Ma'am, I
Yep.
wanted to give you a piece of hope here. The data tells us is that we have a demographic implosion going on in all the advanced economies, including, of course, Japan's been going through this for quite a while. And right now, China's going through a population explosion. But the only country that's got expanding population is India. But the data tells us here in the next 7 to 10 years, they're going to plateau and go into population decline. So almost every country in the planet is going in population decline, and the base cause is this energy thing. It's stagnation of wages. We're not able to do things more freely. We don't have enough food, for example, and that's actually causing a drop in the birth rates and us having children and so forth. Most countries have dropped below the rate of 2, and the reason why is because of the economics and the energy thing that's going on. So the world's population is actually shrinking, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, we can see, and we're still putting on 80 to 100 million every year net, no matter, you know, even with, you know, look at all the infants coming out of Gaza.
That's not in advanced countries. For example, one of the reasons why the unemployment rate is so low here in the United States is because the baby boomers have passed out of the employment picture, and we don't have enough people to replace the baby boomer population. So that turns up in our unemployment numbers being so low, even though the economy isn't all that great. But the only place in the world where they have expanding populations is actually in Asia.
Right. But it's a globe. You pee in the pool, right? You can't just say, oh, well, where I live, there's plenty of room.
I'm just trying to say that in the advanced economies, including Australia and the United States, Canada, the populations are actually shrinking.
Yep. Well, that's good. That's why we'll see how that goes with all the immigration that's going on. So, like I say, all the infants coming out of Gaza, it just seems like, what does it take?
Well, there's a lot of people saying, I think the grass is greener over there, and the truth is it's brown all the way around.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Anyway, so yeah, thank you. That's me. I'm in Canada. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So did we have any closing remarks? Or Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment, the one thing about, because we have an international audience here, the one thing that I think is really important about the United States and we overlook is the Second Amendment, which reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And you know, we talk about whether you're going to be you know, holding up in a little commune or in a cabin in the woods or whatever. It all gets back down to who has the gun rules. And you know, we need to be able to defend ourselves, protect ourselves, and I see that right constantly being, you know, degraded in our country, especially in Hawaii where I live. I'm a competitive shooter. I'm a former military guy. I'm a hunter and fisherman. And, you know, I see that we have to watch all aspects of our government and everything else just to make sure that we can adapt and adjust to future situations. So just wanted to add that piece in there too. Thanks.
Right. Simon, that comment you had about Argentina, that goes back to, you know, the United States, we believe in having this balance between us and our government. And that thing, the situation happened in Argentina was definitely a case of a government run amok.
People doing dumb shit in an organized form.
Yep.
Okay, Dan and Stan, were those your closing remarks, or did you want to add?
That's my closing remarks. That's
those are
it.
your
Okay.
closing. Okay,
We'll
all
talk
right.
more next meeting.
Next month. Okay. So as we found you, we leave you in the love and in the light of the infinite creator, the one within you. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the infinite power and the infinite peace of the infinite creator. All right. Ended the stream. Okay.